Hello everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. I'm still not sure if I should be sharing this. I've tried to tell a few people over the years, but I always see that look in their eyes that says they think I'm crazy or lying. But what happened to me that summer in '94 was absolutely real, and I haven't been able to shake it from my mind for almost 30 years now. I was 22 back then, living with my parents while saving up for my own place. Our house was about 15 minutes outside of Calumet, Washington, a tiny town along the Columbia River. Not much happens there, which is why what I experienced stands out so clearly in my memory. It was early June, probably around the first week. The weather had finally turned warm after a particularly wet spring. I remember because I had the windows down in my old Chevy Corsica, letting the evening air flow through as I drove home from my shift at the diner in town. It was just getting dark, that time when the sky turns deep blue, but you can still see everything clearly. The road home was one I'd driven hundreds of times, a winding country route that followed parts of the Columbia before cutting inland through dense forest. There's this one stretch where you come down a small hill before hitting a sharp curve, and that's where it happened. I was probably doing about 40 miles per hour, just cruising along to some song on the radio. As I started down that hill, I noticed something ahead on the right shoulder of the road. At first, my brain registered it as maybe a deer or elk. We have plenty of those around. But as I got closer, I realized whatever this was stood upright. My first thought was, that's a really tall person. But it wasn't a person, not even close. This thing was walking away from me, moving at a steady, unhurried pace along the edge of the road. Even from behind, I could tell it was massive, way taller than any human I'd ever seen. It had to be at least 7, maybe 8 feet tall. And the width of its shoulders was just wrong, too broad, too massive for anything I could rationalize. Its entire body was covered in this weird, silvery white or light gray hair. Not fur, exactly, more like hair, and I could see dark gray patches or blotches across its back, almost like the roots were darker. The hair wasn't super long, but definitely covered whatever this thing was completely. What really struck me was how it moved. So calm, so deliberate. It didn't seem startled by my car approaching at all. Just kept walking steadily along, as if it had somewhere to be but wasn't in any hurry. I don't think I fully processed what I was seeing at first. My brain kept trying to make it make sense. A guy in a costume, some kind of elaborate prank. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. This thing was real. As I got closer, maybe 50 yards away now, it hit me all at once what I was looking at, and pure terror washed over me. I mean absolute primal fear, unlike anything I've ever felt before or since. My body went cold, then hot, then numb. My hands clenched the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. And then I started screaming. Not like in a movie where someone lets out one good scream and then gets their shit together. No, I just kept screaming over and over, getting louder and louder as I got closer to this thing. I couldn't stop. It was like some animal part of my brain had taken over completely. Even in that state of absolute panic, I noticed something specific that stayed with me all these years. There was this weird cowlick in the hair on its back, right between the shoulder blades. The hair there spiraled in the opposite direction from the rest. Such a small, specific detail, but somehow that's what makes it so real in my memory. No costume would have that kind of detail. I didn't slow down. I don't think I could have if I wanted to. My foot was frozen on the gas pedal, not pressing harder but not easing up either. Just locked in place as I kept moving toward this creature. One thing that still haunts me is that it had almost no neck. Its head just seemed to sit directly on those massive shoulders, and it wasn't pointed at the top like you see in those typical Bigfoot drawings. It was rounded, almost helmet-shaped. As I drove past, I was still screaming. I didn't look directly at it, couldn't bring myself to. I was terrified that if it turned and I saw its face, I might completely lose my mind. So I kept my eyes locked straight ahead, only seeing it in my peripheral vision as I passed. I drove about another quarter-mile to where there's an intersection with another country road, and that's when the adrenaline really hit me hard. I had to stop the car. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely control the wheel. I pulled over to the shoulder and just sat there, hyperventilating. What's strange is that along with the fear came this overwhelming feeling of anger. I was furious, not at the creature, but just in general. It was like my body didn't know how to process what had happened and converted some of that fear into rage. I was pounding on my steering wheel, cursing, trying to catch my breath. My heart was beating so fast I thought I might be having a heart attack. I still refused to look in my rearview mirror. The thought that I might see it walking toward my car, or worse, see its face looking back at me, was too much to bear. I must have sat there for 15 minutes trying to calm down. Eventually, I managed to stop shaking enough to drive again. I took a different route home that night, adding an extra 20 minutes to my drive just to avoid going back past that spot. When I got home, my mom asked if I was feeling okay because I looked so pale. I couldn't tell her what happened. I just said I wasn't feeling well and went straight to my room. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that silver-grey hair, those impossibly broad shoulders, that weird cowlick. The thing is, this wasn't even the first strange experience I'd had in that area. About a year earlier, in the summer of '93, my younger cousin Jake was visiting from Portland. He was 13 then, and we decided to camp out one night down by the river, about 2 miles downstream from where I'd later see the creature. We had a small tent set up, but it was a warm night, so we were lying in our sleeping bags outside, looking at the stars. It must have been around 11 at night when we heard something moving in the trees nearby. At first, I figured it was just a deer or something, but then branches started snapping, big ones. Whatever was moving through those woods was heavy. Then we heard splashing in the river, like something large was wading through the water. Jake and I both sat up, and I whispered that it was probably just an elk. I didn't believe it myself, but I was trying to keep him calm. We lay there for maybe another 5 minutes, barely breathing, when there was this violent crash in the forest floor about 50 yards away. It wasn't just a branch breaking. It sounded like an entire tree had been slammed down onto the ground. Thump! Just this massive, deliberate sound that seemed to shake the earth beneath us. Jake and I didn't even speak. We just looked at each other for half a second, then both scrambled up and ran. We left everything: the tent, our sleeping bags, the cooler with our food. We just took off through the pitch-black forest toward my parents' house, which was about a quarter-mile away. I've never run so fast in my life, especially not in the dark through a forest. I couldn't even see where I was going half the time. I kept tripping over roots and branches, but the fear kept me moving. Jake was right behind me, and I could hear him breathing hard, occasionally whimpering. When we finally reached the house, we were both so terrified we couldn't even speak. We didn't wake my parents. We just sat on the floor of my bedroom with the lights off, backs against the wall, staring at the window. We were both convinced that whatever had made that sound was following us, watching the house. Neither of us slept that night either. My dad was pretty mad the next day when he found out we'd abandoned all our camping gear down by the river. He made us go back with him to get it, but in the daylight with my dad there, it wasn't so scary. We found everything just as we'd left it, though the food in the cooler had been scattered around. Dad blamed raccoons, but the cooler itself had been moved about 20 feet from where we'd left it. I don't know many raccoons that can drag a fully loaded cooler that far. Jake and I never talked about what happened that night. Not really. Once, a few days later before he went home, he asked me, "What do you think that was?" And I just shrugged and said, "I don't know." But we both knew it wasn't any normal animal. After seeing that creature on the road a year later, I've often wondered if it was the same thing we heard that night by the river. I've researched online over the years, read accounts of Bigfoot and Sasquatch sightings, but what I saw doesn't quite match most descriptions. The silver-grey coloring, the rounded head, the lack of neck. It was different somehow. I've never gone back to that stretch of road alone since then. I moved away from Cathlemet a few months later, partly because of what happened. I just couldn't stand being so close to where I'd seen that thing. I still don't know what it was. I don't think I ever will. But I know what I saw, and no one can convince me otherwise. Sometimes I wonder if it's still out there, walking those roads at dusk, completely unconcerned about who might see it. Story 2. I still can't believe it's been 4 years since that night. I've spent countless hours thinking about those few seconds, trying to convince myself that what I saw wasn't real. But I know what I saw. I was 17 then, just a regular kid from Rossland with normal teenage problems, worried about finals, thinking about college applications, and trying to figure out if Emma liked me as more than a friend. It was mid-July, a Friday night, with nothing to do in our small mountain town. My brother Kyle had his license and access to our parents' old Subaru, which meant freedom. Kyle suggested we drive up to Summit Road, what locals still call the old Cascade Highway, to stargaze. The 4 of us piled in, Kyle driving, his girlfriend Jessica in the passenger seat, with Emma and me in the back. Summit Road is this winding mountain route that snakes up through dense forest with these crazy hairpin turns. During the day, it offers incredible views of the valley, but at night, it's pitch black except for your headlights cutting through the darkness. The road is barely maintained anymore since they built the new highway, which makes it perfect for teenagers looking to get away. We left around 10 at night. Our parents thought we were going to the late movie and trail, but instead, we headed up the mountain with a couple of blankets, some snacks, and Kyle's ridiculous UFO tracking app that he'd downloaded. The night was warm but not hot, perfect summer weather with hardly any clouds. I remember the smell of pine coming through the cracked windows as we climbed higher and higher up the mountain. Kyle was driving cautiously. The road has these sharp turns that come out of nowhere, and there are no guardrails in some spots, just a sheer drop into darkness. Jessica was going on about some party happening next weekend, while Emma sat quietly beside me, occasionally pointing out particularly bright stars through the window. We were about 20 minutes up the mountain when it happened. Kyle was navigating one of those hairpin turns, the headlights swinging wildly across the landscape as we made the turn. The beams swept across this small clearing where a stream cuts across the road. He threw a culvert. That's when I saw it. Standing by the stream was this figure, not a bear, not a deer, not anything I'd ever seen before. It was bent over the water like it was drinking or maybe catching something. When our headlights hit it, the creature straightened up in one fluid motion. It was tall, easily 7 feet, maybe more. The headlights caught its reddish-brown fur that covered its entire body. What struck me most was how it moved. Not lumbering or awkward like you'd expect something that big to move. It was graceful, almost athletic. Despite its height, it wasn't bulky like you see in those cheesy Bigfoot documentaries. This thing was lean but muscular, like a basketball player or swimmer. The moment our lights hit it, the creature's head turned toward us for just a split second. I swear I could see its eyes reflect in the headlights. Not like animal eyeshine, but something different. Then it turned away from us, looking toward the mountain, and in 2 massive strides crossed the clearing to this steep embankment. This wasn't some gentle slope. It was this near vertical gold-colored dirt bank, easily 5 meters high. The thing scaled it in seconds, pulling itself up with powerful arms, then disappeared into the tree line above. No struggling, no slipping on the loose dirt, just up and gone. The whole thing lasted maybe 5-6 seconds tops, but it felt like time slowed down. I remember my heart pounding in my chest, my mouth hanging open, unable to even say anything. The sound of Emma crying beside me snapped me out of it. She was shaking, her hand gripping my arm so tight it left marks. "Did you see that?" I finally managed to whisper. Emma just nodded, tears streaming down her face. "See what?" Kyle asked, completely focused on navigating the next turn, oblivious to what had just happened. Jessica turned around in her seat. "What's wrong with Emma?" I tried to explain, but the words sounded ridiculous coming out of my mouth. "There was something back there, by the stream. It wasn't human." Kyle laughed it off. "Probably just a bear, dude." "It wasn't a bear," Emma said, her voice shaking. "It was standing, on two legs, and it moved wrong." Jessica clearly thought we were trying to scare them. "Very funny, guys. Nice try." We kept driving up to our usual spot, this small clearing where the road widens enough to park safely. But the mood was ruined. Emma wouldn't let go of my arm, and I couldn't stop looking into the darkness of the forest surrounding us. Every snapping twig or rustling leaf made us jump. Kyle and Jessica tried to enjoy the night, laying out a blanket and pointing out constellations. But Emma and I sat in the car with the doors locked. After about 20 minutes, I convinced Kyle to drive us back down. He was annoyed, but Jessica could tell something had genuinely freaked us out. The drive down was tense. We passed the same spot where we'd seen it, and I made Kyle slow down. There was nothing there, just the small stream crossing under the road and the steep embankment rising up on the other side. When we got home, Emma came inside with me. My parents were already asleep, so we sat in the kitchen, drinking hot chocolate and trying to make sense of what we'd seen. Emma kept insisting it had to be a person in a costume, but I couldn't buy that. No person could have climbed that embankment so effortlessly in the dark, especially not in some bulky costume. "We have to go back tomorrow," I said. "In daylight. We need to look for footprints or something." Emma nodded, though I could tell she was terrified at the thought. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that figure. The way it moved, how it scaled that bank like it was nothing. By morning, I'd almost convinced myself it was just a weird shadow or maybe a large elk that the headlights had distorted somehow. Emma showed up at my house around noon the next day. She looked like she hadn't slept either, but she was determined. We borrowed Kyle's car, he wanted nothing to do with our crazy Bigfoot hunt, and drove back up Summit Road. In daylight, the spot looked completely different. The stream was smaller than I remembered, just a trickle of water really. The embankment was just as steep as I recalled, though, a near vertical wall of golden-colored dirt and rock that rose about 5 meters from the stream bed to the forest above. We spent hours searching the area. The summer foliage was thick, covering most of the ground near the stream. Any tracks would have been impossible to find in the dense undergrowth. We looked for broken branches, tufts of hair, anything that might confirm what we'd seen. The only thing that struck me was standing at the base of that embankment, looking up. In daylight, it looked even more imposing. How could anything that size climb it so effortlessly? I tried to scale it myself and barely made it halfway before sliding back down, covered in dirt. "No human could climb this that fast," I said, brushing dirt from my jeans. "Especially not in the dark." Emma just stared at the forest above. "Do you think it's still up there, watching us?" The thought sent chills down my spine. The dense forest stretched for miles in every direction. Whatever we saw could be anywhere. We left after a couple of hours, no more certain than when we arrived. On the drive back, Emma asked me not to tell anyone else. "They'll just think we're crazy or making it up for attention," she said. And she was right. When we tried to explain it to Kyle again that evening, he just rolled his eyes. "You guys watch too many of those stupid cryptid shows," he said. Jessica was a little more sympathetic, but clearly didn't believe us either. That night changed everything for me, though. I started researching Bigfoot sightings in British Columbia, looking for anything similar to what we'd seen. There were a few reports from the Kootenay region over the years, some describing a reddish-colored Sasquatch, but none of them mentioned the lean, athletic build of what we saw. Most described a bulkier creature. Emma and I drifted apart after that summer. She seemed to want to forget the whole thing happened. By senior year, she rarely mentioned it, and when I brought it up, she'd changed the subject. I think seeing something that defied explanation scared her in a fundamental way. It meant the world wasn't as predictable or safe as she wanted to believe. I'm 21 now, in my third year of forestry studies at UBC. I still go back to that spot whenever I visit home. Sometimes I bring a camera, hoping to catch something, but there's never anything unusual. Just the stream, the embankment, and the endless forest. I've told this story to exactly 4 people since it happened. 3 thought I was making it up or had seen a bear in poor lighting conditions. Only one person, my ecology professor, seemed genuinely interested. He didn't dismiss it outright, just nodded and said, "The mountains hide many secrets." To this day, I can close my eyes and see every detail of those few seconds. The reddish fur catching in our headlights, the fluid motion as it turned to look at the mountain, the impossible ease with which it scaled that dirt bank. It wasn't a bear, it wasn't a person in a costume, and it definitely wasn't my imagination. Whatever it was, it moved through those woods like it belonged there more than we did, like we were the intruders, not it. And sometimes, when I'm hiking alone in the backcountry for my studies, I catch myself scanning the tree line, wondering if I'm being watched by something that science says shouldn't exist. I still don't have an explanation for what Emma and I saw that night. All I know is that for 5 or 6 seconds, our headlights illuminated something that shouldn't exist but does. And no matter how many years pass, those few seconds on Summit Road have permanently changed how I see the world, and what I believe might be hiding just beyond the reach of our headlights. Story 3. I still get chills thinking about it. 32 years later, and I can't drive through wooded areas at night without checking my mirrors every few seconds. I've faced enemy fire in Korea, watched men die, but nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what happened that June night in 1991. I'd been retired from the army for almost 15 years by then. Sergeant Victor Langston, out to pasture and trying to be a decent dad to my boy Daniel. He was 7 at the time, full of energy and curious about everything. I wanted to show him some of the places I used to explore as a teenager, back before I enlisted. There was this spot north of French Gulch, California, deep in the woods where I used to camp with my dad. Thought it would be nice, you know? A father-son thing. We drove up in my old Ford pickup on a Friday afternoon. Daniel was excited at first, but the long drive wore him out. By the time we got deep into the forest, the sun was already setting. I hadn't planned on being out so late, but I got turned around a couple times on those old logging roads. They don't maintain them like they used to. I remember checking my watch. It was around 8:30 in the evening when I spotted these massive pine cones along the roadside, the kind my wife would love for Christmas decorations. Daniel had fallen asleep in the passenger seat, head against the window, mouth open slightly. Didn't want to wake him. So I pulled over, turned the truck around so the headlights would shine on the area where I saw the pine cones. I left the engine running, didn't want the battery to die out there. The headlights cut through the darkness, creating these long shadows behind every tree and rock. It was quiet except for the low rumble of the truck engine and the occasional breeze through the pines. I grabbed an old canvas bag from behind the seat and walked around to the front of the truck. The air was cool and smelled like pine sap and dirt. I remember thinking how peaceful it was out there, away from the noise of town. Just me, my boys sleeping in the truck, and miles of wilderness. I'd been gathering pine cones for maybe 10 minutes, had a decent haul going, when I heard it. This sound, hard to describe even now. It wasn't a howl exactly. not like a wolf or coyote. It was higher pitched, almost like a screech but deeper at the same time. Started low, then went up, then back down. Lasted maybe 5 or 6 seconds. I froze, pine cone in hand, and looked toward the ridge behind the truck. The sound had come from up there, maybe a couple 100 yards away. My first thought was elk. They can make some weird sounds. Or maybe a bear. I'd heard black bears make strange noises when agitated. But this was different. Felt different. Made the hair on my arm stand up. I went back to gathering cones, but kept glancing up at the ridge. Couldn't see much beyond where the headlights reached. Just darkness and the silhouettes of trees against the night sky. There was a 3/4 moon out, giving everything this pale blue glow. Then I heard it. Thumps. Rhythmic, heavy thumps coming from the ridge, like footfalls, but heavier than any human could make. And they were getting faster. Thump, 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 thump. Whatever it was coming down the hill, fast, heading straight for me. My combat training kicked in. Adrenaline flooded my system. I dropped the bag of pine cones and ran for the driver's side door. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely grab the handle. The thumping was getting louder, closer. I could feel the vibration in my chest. I yanked the door open and threw myself inside, slamming it shut. Daniel stirred but didn't wake up. The keys were still in the ignition, engine running. I jammed the transmission into drive and hit the gas. That's when I made the mistake of looking in my rearview mirror. God help me. In the red glow of my taillights, I saw it. A massive, dark figure, standing upright on 2 legs, had to be at least 8 feet tall. Broad shoulders, covered in what looked like dark hair or fur. One arm hung at its side, the other was raised like it was reaching for the truck. It wasn't a bear. Bears don't stand like that. This thing was proportioned wrong for a bear. Too human-like in its stance, but massive, muscular, and the way it moved. Jesus, the way it moved. I floored it. The tires spun on the dirt road before catching, and the truck lurched forward. I nearly drove off the edge of the road twice, taking those curves too fast. Daniel woke up startled, asking what was happening. I told him to put his seatbelt on, that we had to get home quick because I forgot something important. My hands were white-knuckled on the steering wheel. I kept checking the mirrors, terrified I'd see that thing chasing us. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might have a heart attack right there. It took us about 45 minutes to get back to the main road. I didn't slow down until we hit pavement. Daniel fell back asleep eventually, but I was wide awake, running on pure adrenaline and fear. When we got home, my wife asked why we were back so early. I couldn't tell her, not then. I mumbled something about not feeling well and carried Daniel to bed. That night, I sat in the kitchen with all the lights on, a cup of coffee gone cold in front of me, and my service revolver on the table. I couldn't shake the image of that thing in my mirror, the size of it, the way it moved. I've tried telling people over the years. Most laugh it off or think I'm exaggerating. Daniel doesn't remember much from that night, just that we came home early. He teases me about it now. Dad's Bigfoot story, he calls it, but I know what I saw. I've hunted since I was a boy, spent years in the military. I know the difference between a bear and whatever that was. In Korea, I saw men do terrible things to each other. I've been shot at, bombed, nearly died twice. But I've never been as scared as I was that night above French Gulch. The thing that haunts me most isn't just that I saw something that shouldn't exist. It's the feeling I had when I looked in that mirror. That wasn't just some animal acting on instinct. There was intelligence in the way it moved, the way it positioned itself. Like it knew exactly what it was doing, like it was hunting me. I went back up there the next day with my buddy Mike, an ex-Marine who wouldn't laugh at me. Wanted to see if there was any evidence. The pine cones I'd dropped were scattered all over. Could have been animals, I guess, but we found something else. Footprints, massive ones, sunk deep into the soft earth. Mike took one look and didn't say a word for a long time. Finally asked if we could leave. We did. For months after, I had nightmares, always the same. I'm back on that road, but my truck won't start. I hear the thumping getting closer. I look in the rearview mirror, and it's right there, reaching for the door handle. Then I wake up. I'm 73 now. I've had a good life. Raised my son, watched him have kids of his own. But I've never gone back to those woods, not once in all these years. Sometimes Daniel asks if we can take his boys up there, show them where their grandpa used to camp as a kid. I always find an excuse, because I know it's still out there. Maybe not in that exact spot, but somewhere in those mountains, waiting, watching. People ask me if I believe in Bigfoot, in Sasquatch. I don't answer anymore. Belief has nothing to do with it. You don't believe in something you've seen with your own eyes. I know what I saw that night. It was real, it was massive, and it was coming for me. Sometimes, on quiet nights when I can't sleep, I find myself wondering what would have happened if I'd been just a few seconds slower getting to my truck, or if the engine hadn't started, or if I'd decided to wake Daniel up to help me gather pine cones. I don't know why it didn't chase us. Maybe the truck was too fast. Maybe it wasn't hungry. Maybe we just got lucky. All I know is that the world is bigger and stranger than most people realize. There are things out there, in the dark places, that don't fit into the neat little boxes science has created. Things that have been around a lot longer than us. Things that watch and wait. I still have one of those pine cones, keep it in my desk drawer. Sometimes I take it out and hold it, feel the weight of it in my hand. Reminds me that it wasn't a dream or my imagination. That night happened. That thing was real. My doctor says I shouldn't dwell on it, says it's not good for my blood pressure. But how do you forget something like that? How do you go back to seeing the world the way you did before? You don't. You can't. You just learn to live with the knowledge that the monsters in the dark are real, and sometimes they come down from the hills to see what you're doing, all alone in the wilderness. If you're ever up near French Gulch, driving those back roads as the sun goes down, keep your doors locked and your engine running, and whatever you do, don't stop to pick up pine cones, no matter how perfect they look for Christmas decorations, because you never know what's watching from the ridge above, waiting for the right moment to come down. Story 4. I've been sitting on this for almost 40 years now, and I've never really talked about it online. I'm honestly not sure why I'm even writing this out now, but I guess I just need to get it off my chest finally. What happened that day in '85 still gives me chills when I think about it too much. It was mid-August, 1985. I was 21, just finished my second year at community college, working at my uncle's hardware store that summer. My buddy Mark and I had been friends since elementary school, and we'd spend our days off hiking and exploring the forests around Josephine County in Oregon. We both grew up there, knew those woods pretty well, or at least we thought we did. That particular day was hot, probably around 90 degrees. We'd packed our usual stuff, couple sandwiches each, water bottles. Mark brought his binoculars since he was big into bird watching. I remember I was wearing my favorite Levi's jeans, a faded blue t-shirt, and my dad's old hiking boots that he'd given me the Christmas before. Nothing special about the day, really. Just another hike. We parked my truck. This brand new Ford pickup I'd just bought 3 months earlier still had that new car smell and everything, in this small clearing off one of the logging roads. I was so damn proud of that truck. First new vehicle I'd ever owned, paid for with my own money. Anyway, we hiked about 5 or 6 miles that day, following a trail we'd been on maybe twice before. Nothing crazy difficult, just steep enough in some parts to get your heart rate up. We saw a couple deer early in the day, and Mark got excited when he spotted some kind of hawk he'd been trying to see all summer. Normal stuff, the kind of day we'd had dozens of times before. We started heading back around 6:30 or so. The sun was getting lower, and neither of us wanted to be navigating those trails in the dark. I remember checking my watch, one of those Casio digital ones with the little light, at around 7:15, and figuring we had maybe 45 minutes of decent light left. We were about half a mile from where I'd parked the truck, just shooting the breeze about this girl Mark had started dating. That's when I noticed something moving near my truck. At first, I thought maybe someone had driven up and parked next to us, which would have been weird since this wasn't exactly a popular spot. But as we got a little closer, I could see it was just my truck sitting there, but something, or someone, was moving around it. "Hey," I said to Mark, keeping my voice down. "You see that?" He nodded, already crouching down a bit. "Someone by your truck?" I felt this immediate surge of anger. My brand new truck, you know? I had this sudden fear they were trying to break in or something. We both instinctively slowed down, got lower, and started moving more carefully. I remember the feeling of my heart pounding in my chest, that fight or flight response kicking in. As we got closer, maybe 100 yards away, we could hear something. Not breaking glass or anything violent like that. Just these faint sounds, like something touching the metal of the truck. Not pounding or hitting, just contact. That's when I started to realize something wasn't right. The figure I could see wasn't moving like a person. There was something off about it, something I couldn't quite place. And then, as we got even closer, I realized there weren't just one but 3 figures around my truck. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I swear to God, I've never felt anything like that before or since. It was like every cell in my body was screaming that something was wrong. Mark grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in hard enough to leave marks. "Ryan," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "What the fuck is that?" We were maybe 50 or 60 feet away now, moving from tree to tree, staying as quiet as we could. That's when I got my first good look at them. 2 of them were big, really big, at least 6.5 feet tall. The third one was smaller, maybe 5 feet or so. But it wasn't their height that made my blood run cold. They were covered in hair. Not like wearing fur coats or anything like that. The hair was part of them, covering their entire bodies. They weren't wearing clothes, not a stitch. And their proportions, Jesus, their proportions were all wrong for humans. Their shoulders were too wide, arms too long, hands that looked massive even from where we were standing. Their necks were either really short or just incredibly thick. It was hard to tell from that distance. Despite their strange appearance, there was something unnervingly powerful about them. Even the smallest one had this compact, muscular build, not bulky like a bodybuilder, but efficient, like everything about them was designed for strength and movement. We froze, neither of us sure what to do. Part of me was terrified, but another part was just fascinated. I'd never seen anything like this, couldn't even process what I was looking at. It was like my brain was refusing to accept what my eyes were seeing. Then the wind shifted. I don't know if they smelled us or heard us, but suddenly all 3 of them turned in our direction. No growling, no sounds at all. They just noticed us. And then they ran. The 2 bigger ones took off toward the edge of the clearing where the trees were thickest. But the smaller one, it ran almost directly into a patch of moonlight that was coming through the trees. And that's when I got the clearest look at it. Dark brown hair covering its entire body. Not matted or dirty looking, but almost glossy in the moonlight. And the way it ran... God, the way it ran. It wasn't lumbering or awkward. It moved with these powerful, balanced strides, leaning forward like an Olympic sprinter. It had this athlete's gait, this efficiency of movement that was both beautiful and terrifying. Within seconds, all 3 had disappeared into the tree line on the far side of the clearing. The whole encounter couldn't have lasted more than 20 seconds from the moment they noticed us to when they vanished. Mark and I just stood there, completely frozen. I don't think either of us even breathed for a full minute. Then, without saying a word, we both broke into a run toward my truck. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so bad I could barely get them into the ignition. We jumped in, locked the doors, and I started. The engine. The headlights came on, illuminating the empty clearing in front of us. Nothing there now, just trees and shadows. I threw the truck in reverse, spun it around faster than was probably safe on that dirt road, and drove us out of there as fast as I could. We didn't say a word for at least 10 minutes. I was white-knuckling the steering wheel, and Mark was pressed against the passenger door, staring out the window like he expected something to come rushing out of the darkness at any moment. Finally, as we hit the main road, Mark broke the silence. "We can't tell anyone about this." That was it. That was all he said for the rest of the 40-minute drive back to town. And he was right. Who would believe us? We'd sound crazy, like we were drunk or high or just making shit up for attention. 2 years later, we did tell one guy we worked with at the lumberyard, Dave, an older guy who was always telling hunting stories. He laughed at us, thought we were pulling his leg. After that, we never mentioned it to anyone else. Mark and I drifted apart a few years later. He moved to Seattle for a job, got married, had kids. We'd exchanged Christmas cards for a while, then even that stopped, but we never discussed that night again, not even between ourselves. It was like we had this unspoken agreement to pretend it never happened. But I know what I saw. They weren't bears standing on their hind legs. They weren't people in costumes playing a prank. They moved too naturally, too purposefully. And they weren't afraid of us. Not exactly. It was more like we surprised them, interrupted whatever they were doing with my truck. They weren't aggressive or threatening. They just left when they realized they weren't alone. I've spent countless nights since then trying to make sense of it. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever you want to call them. I never believed in any of that stuff before. I used to laugh at those blurry photos and shaky videos. But after what I saw that night, I don't laugh anymore. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we'd arrived a few minutes later, or if we'd called out to them instead of hiding. Would they have just run anyway? Would they have approached us? What were they doing with my truck in the first place? Just curious about it, trying to figure out what it was? I've never gone back to that specific spot. I still hike, still love those woods, but I stick to the popular trails now, the places where there are always other people around. And I never ever go alone. The strangest part is that I don't feel afraid when I think about them now. There was something almost gentle about them, despite their size and strength. They could have easily charged at us, hurt us if they wanted to, but they chose to leave instead, to disappear back into their world and leave us to ours. I'm 59 now. I've had a normal life, got married, had 2 daughters, worked the same job for 30 years before retiring last spring. Most days, I don't even think about what happened. But sometimes, when I'm driving on a back road at dusk, or when I'm sitting on my porch looking out at the tree line behind my house, I remember, and I wonder if they're still out there, still watching, still curious about us and our strange metal machines. I wonder if they remember that night too, the night they were surprised by 2 young men in the woods, and I wonder what they might have told others of their kind about us. Story 5. I've never been able to really talk about what happened that day in '83. Not because I don't remember it. Trust me, I remember every single detail. But because people either don't believe me or they think I made it up for attention. I was 13 back then, so everyone just assumed I was a kid with an overactive imagination. But I know what I saw. We lived out in the sticks in York County, South Carolina. And when I say sticks, I mean our house was buried so deep in the woods you couldn't even see another house from our property. Just trees in every direction, with our little home sitting at the end of this winding gravel road that seemed to go on forever. My dad liked the privacy, said it kept the riffraff away. Mom just complained about how long it took to get groceries. That fall, October I think, was unusually warm. The leaves were changing, but it still felt like summer most days. I just started 8th grade at the middle school, about 20 minutes away, and part of my chores was picking up the newspaper from the main road every day after the bus dropped me off. Our mailbox was way up at the end of our property line, near the Robinsons' place, the closest thing we had to neighbors, almost a mile from our house. Usually I'd hop on my bike, this beat-up Schwinn that was already old when my dad got it for me, and ride up there with Butler, our blue-tick hound. Butler was getting on in years, but still followed me everywhere. That day, October 19th, 83, started like any other. Got off the bus around 3:30, dropped my backpack inside, and Mom reminded me to get the paper. I whistled for Butler, grabbed my bike and headed up our long driveway toward the main road. It was one of those perfect fall days. Sun was shining through the trees, making these gold patterns on the gravel. On the right side of our road was nothing but thick woods, mostly oak and pine, and on the left was this big open field that Mr. Robinson used to grow corn, but it had already been harvested, so it was just stubble. About halfway to the mailbox, Butler started acting weird. He normally ran ahead of me, nose to the ground, checking out every smell, but suddenly he slowed down and stuck close to my bike wheel. I figured maybe he'd caught scent of a deer or something. Wasn't unusual. Then I smelled it too. It's hard to describe, but it was like, have you ever smelled wild onions mixed with wet dog? And something else, something musky and earthy. It wasn't exactly bad, just really strong and definitely not a normal wood smell. I remember thinking maybe something had died nearby. I slowed down my bike because Butler had practically stopped, and he was making this low whining sound I'd never heard before. His ears were pinned back and his tail was tucked between his legs. Butler wasn't a scaredy cat dog. He'd tree raccoons and chase off coyotes without blinking, so seeing him act scared made me nervous. "What's wrong, boy?" I asked him, and that's when I followed his gaze to my right, toward the woods. There's this little hollow off to the side of our road, kind of a dip in the land where rainwater would collect. It had these wild muscadine grapevines growing all over and some scrubby bushes. At first, I didn't see anything unusual, just shadows and vegetation. Then it moved. I swear my heart stopped for a second. Standing there, partially hidden behind some brush, was something massive. I'm not exaggerating when I say it was tall as our storage shed, maybe 7 or 8 feet. It had these incredibly broad shoulders, like a football player, but wider, and its body was thick and powerful looking. The thing that really struck me was its color. It was covered in this light brown hair, not fur exactly, and not shaggy like a bear. It was dense, short hair that covered its entire body, and where the sunlight hit it from behind, it gave off this weird amber glow around the edges, like a halo. It was pulling down grape clusters with its hands, and they were hands, not paws, and eating them. I could see yellowish teeth, blunt, not like a predator's. They reminded me of horse teeth, but bigger. But its face, God, its face is what I still see in my nightmares sometimes. It wasn't an animal face, not completely. It looked partially human, a really broad face with these prominent cheekbones and a flat nose. But the eyes are what got me. They were wide, deep-set, brown eyes set under a heavy brow ridge, and they were watching me, not with aggression or anything, but with curiosity, like it was just as surprised to see me as I was to see it. We stared at each other for what felt like forever, but was probably only a few seconds. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Butler was frozen too, still making that weird whining sound. Then it took a step toward me, just one step, but that's all it took. It didn't seem aggressive. It actually made this weird gesture with its hand, almost like it was reaching out, but I completely freaked out. I dropped my bike right there in the middle of the road and ran. Just straight up abandoned everything and ran faster than I've ever run in my life. Butler was right there with me, actually running ahead of me this time. I could hear him breathing hard and I was gasping for air, but I didn't stop. I just kept thinking about those eyes and how big that thing was, and how easily it could catch me if it wanted to. I kept glancing over my shoulder as I ran, expecting to see it chasing after me, but there was nothing. Just the empty road and my abandoned bike getting smaller in the distance. When I finally got to our house, I burst through the door, practically hyperventilating. Mom was in the kitchen making dinner, and she turned around with this annoyed look on her face. Daniel Mitchell, what on earth is wrong with you, and where's the newspaper? I tried to tell her, I really did. I was talking so fast, the words tumbling out about the creature and the grapes and Butler being scared. I was shaking all over, pointing back toward the road. She put her hand on my forehead like she was checking for a fever. Have you been reading those monster comics again? I told your father those things would rot your brain. Mom, I'm not making this up. There was something out there. It was huge and it was watching me, and that's enough, Daniel. You probably just saw a bear. They come down from the hills, sometimes looking for food before winter. It wasn't a bear. Bears don't have faces like people. She just sighed and shook her head. Go wash up for dinner. And tomorrow you'll have to get your bike and actually bring back the newspaper like you're supposed to. I couldn't believe it. The biggest, scariest thing in my life had just happened, and she thought I was making it up. I tried telling my dad when he got home from work, but he had the same reaction. Said I was getting too old for tall tales and that I needed to man up and stop being scared of the woods. The next day, Dad drove me up the road to get my bike. I was terrified the whole time, scanning the woods for any sign of the creature. My bike was exactly where I'd left it, but the newspaper was gone from the mailbox. Dad was annoyed, thinking I'd lost it or was lying about not getting it. For weeks afterward, I refused to ride my bike to get the newspaper alone. I'd either go with Dad in his truck or not at all, which earned me a ton of lectures about responsibility. I couldn't explain to them why I was so scared. They just wouldn't listen. Then something happened that changed everything. About 3 weeks after my encounter, my Uncle Jim came to visit. He was my dad's younger brother and an avid hunter. He wanted to check out some potential deer stands in our woods before hunting season officially opened. Dad suggested he look at that hollow area near the road, saying it was a good spot for deer because of the wild grapes. Uncle Jim left early that morning with his thermos and binoculars. He came back around noon, and I'll never forget the look on his face. He was pale, his hands were shaking as he poured himself a cup of coffee, and he kept looking out the kitchen window toward the woods. "Everything okay, Jim?" Dad asked. Uncle Jim took a deep breath. "Tommy, you ever see anything unusual in those woods of yours?" Dad laughed. "Like what? Two-headed snakes?" "I'm serious, Tommy. I was checking out that hollow you mentioned, and I found a place where something's been bedding down, something big." I perked up immediately, listening intently from my spot at the kitchen table. "Probably just a deer," Dad said dismissively. Uncle Jim shook his head. "Deer don't make beds 4 feet wide, and deer don't leave footprints that look almost human, but are 15 inches long." The kitchen went silent. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "And," Uncle Jim continued, lowering his voice, "I think I saw it, just for a second, moving through the trees. Biggest damn thing I've ever seen in these woods. Brown, walking on 2 legs. At first I thought it was a guy in a coat, but no man is that big or moves that way." Dad stared at him. "You're pulling my leg. I swear on Mom's grave, Tommy, there's something out there." I couldn't contain myself anymore. "I told you, that's what I saw. That's what I've been trying to tell you." Both men turned to look at me, and for the first time, I saw my dad's expression change from disbelief to concern. After that day, things were different. Dad didn't exactly say he believed me, but he stopped making me get the newspaper alone. We started keeping Butler inside more, especially at night. And sometimes I'd catch Dad standing on the porch in the evenings, staring out at the woods with his shotgun nearby. We never saw the creature again that year, at least not up close, but there were times I'd be in my room at night and hear something moving around outside. Heavy footsteps that didn't sound like any animal I knew. And occasionally, especially after rainstorms, Dad would find those strange, large footprints at the edge of our property. I did my own research as I got older, read books about cryptids and unexplained phenomena. Eventually, I came across descriptions and accounts that matched what I'd seen. The height, the appearance, the behavior. It all pointed to what people call Bigfoot or Sasquatch. I'm 39 now, and I've never, again, encountered anything like what I saw that day. But I've never forgotten it either. That creature, whatever it was, changed how I see the world. It made me realize there are things out there we don't understand, things science hasn't explained. I still live in South Carolina, though not in that same house. Sometimes I drive by the old property, which has been developed now with several homes where our woods used to be. I always slow down when I pass that hollow, wondering if it's still out there somewhere deeper in the hills, eating wild grapes and watching with those impossibly human eyes. I don't expect people to believe me. Most don't. But Uncle Jim knew. He saw it too. And sometimes that's enough to help me sleep at night, knowing I wasn't just a kid with an overactive imagination. Something was in those woods with us. Something that wasn't supposed to exist. And sometimes late at night when I can't sleep, I still wonder if it ever thinks about the skinny kid on the bike who ran away that fall day in '83. Story 6. I've never really told this story to anyone outside my family. It's been over 20 years now, but I still get goosebumps thinking about it. This happened back in 2002 when I was 15. My family is Choctaw, and we have land east of Broken Bow, Oklahoma, in the Ouachita foothills. That summer, my cousins Marcus and Jeremy came to stay for a couple weeks. We were all into horses back then. My dad had 4, 2-quarter horses, a paint, and an old Appaloosa that was gentle enough for beginners. Every chance we got, we'd saddle up and explore the property. Dad had about 80 acres that connected to tribal land, so we had plenty of room to ride. That day started like any other summer day. Hot as hell, like mid-90s by 10 in the morning. We got up early to beat the worst of the heat, had some breakfast, and headed out to the barn. I remember Jeremy complaining about the humidity. He lived in Arizona and wasn't used to feeling like he was breathing through a wet towel. We saddled up the horses and headed out around 9. I was on Buddy, my favorite quarter horse. Marcus took Scout, the paint, and Jeremy rode the Appaloosa Dusty. We had plans to ride out to this creek about 3 miles from the house. There was a good swimming hole there, and we figured we'd let the horses rest while we cooled off. The first part of the ride was normal. We followed this old logging road for about a mile, then cut across a meadow and into the woods. We were joking around, talking about girls from school, just normal teenage boy stuff. The woods were alive with sound, birds calling, insects buzzing, the occasional rustle in the underbrush from squirrels or rabbits. Around 11, we came to this part of the trail that narrowed as it went down into a brushy hollow. It was a bit overgrown since not many people used it. The trees got thicker there, mostly post oaks and some pine, with a lot of underbrush. The light filtered through in patches, making these weird shadows on the ground. That's when I first noticed something was off. Buddy, who was normally pretty chill, started getting antsy. His ears kept flicking back and forth, and he was snorting more than usual. I figured maybe there was a snake nearby or something, so I kept a tight rein and tried to calm him down. "What's up with Buddy?" Marcus asked from behind me. "Don't know. He's acting weird." Then I noticed Scout and Dusty were acting up too. Scout kept sidestepping, and Dusty straight up tried to turn around at one point. Jeremy, who wasn't the best rider, was struggling to keep him facing forward. "Maybe there's a mountain lion around," Jeremy suggested, his voice higher than normal. I remember thinking that was possible. We'd seen mountain lion tracks before, though I'd never actually spotted one. But the horses' behavior seemed different somehow, more like panic than the alertness they usually showed around predators. We kept moving forward, but slower now. The horses were really fighting us, and then I noticed the silence. It hit me all at once. The woods had gone completely quiet. No birds, no insects, nothing. Just the sound of the horses' hooves on the trail and their nervous breathing. That silence was wrong, unnatural. Anyone who spent time in the woods knows what I'm talking about. It's like the whole forest was holding its breath. "You guys hear that?" I asked. "Hear what?" Marcus said. "Nothing. There's nothing to hear." We all stopped for a second, and the silence pressed in around us. Jeremy looked genuinely scared now. "Maybe we should head back," he said. I was about to agree when I saw movement in the trees to our left, maybe 30 yards away. At first, I thought it was just shadows or a deer. But then I saw it clearly. Something big was moving parallel to the trail, something on 2 legs. "Look," I whispered, pointing. Marcus and Jeremy both turned. The thing was moving through the trees, weaving between trunks, staying just visible enough that we could track its movement. "What the hell is that?" Marcus hissed. I couldn't answer. My mouth had gone dry. Whatever it was huge, way bigger than any person I'd ever seen, and it was moving fast, keeping pace with us, even though the terrain was rough and steep in places. The horses were absolutely losing it now. Buddy was trembling beneath me, making this weird whimpering noise I'd never heard from him before. Scout kept backing up, nearly bumping into Dusty. Jeremy was white-knuckling the reins, looking like he might fall off any second, and then the thing cut across the trail ahead of us, maybe 40 feet away. That's when I got a good look at it. It was massive, had to be 7 feet tall at least. The broadest shoulders I've ever seen on anything, with long arms that hung down past its waist. It moved with this weird, slightly hunched posture, but it was definitely on 2 legs. And the hair, Jesus, it was like looking at the hairiest man you could imagine, but more. Dark brown or black hair covered its entire body, thick and matted in places. It stopped right in the middle of the trail and turned to look at us. I'll never forget that moment, the 3 of us frozen on our panicking horses and this thing just staring at us. Its face was mostly hidden by hair, but I could feel it looking at us. Not aggressively, almost curiously, like it was as surprised to see us as we were to see it. Time seemed to stretch out forever in that moment. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Buddy was trembling so badly I thought he might collapse under me. I remember gripping the saddle horn so tight my fingers went numb. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, it turned and vanished into the trees on the other side of the trail. Just disappeared into the brush like something that size shouldn't be able to do. 1 second it was there, the next, gone. None of us moved for what felt like forever. Then Jeremy broke the silence. "What the fuck was that?" His voice cracked. I didn't have an answer. Marcus was staring at the spot where the thing had disappeared, his face pale. "We need to go," I finally managed to say. "Now." But going forward meant passing where that thing had crossed the trail. None of us wanted to do that. "Let's go back," Marcus suggested, already turning Scout around. We didn't argue. We turned the horses and practically flew back the way we came. The horses didn't need any encouragement. They were as desperate to get away as we were. We didn't slow down until we reached the meadow, and even then, the horses were jittery, constantly looking back toward the woods. When we got back to the barn, we were all shaking. We unsaddled the horses in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. It wasn't until we were walking back to the house that Marcus finally said what we were all thinking. "That was a Bigfoot, wasn't it?" I'd grown up hearing stories. My grandfather used to talk about the wild people in the woods, creatures the Choctaw had known about for generations. But those were just stories, right? The kind of tales you tell around campfires to scare kids. "I don't know what it was," I said honestly. "But it wasn't a bear, and it sure as hell wasn't a person." Jeremy, who'd been quiet the whole ride back, suddenly looked determined. "We should go back tomorrow, with your dad's rifle." I thought he was crazy, but at the same time, I needed to know. We needed proof, something to confirm we hadn't all hallucinated the same thing. So the next morning, we went back. We didn't take the horses. We figured they wouldn't go anywhere near that place again anyway. We took my dad's old 30-30, though I'm not sure what we planned to do with it. Shoot the thing? Take a picture? I don't think any of us really knew. We hiked back to the spot where we'd seen it cross the trail. In the daylight, with no horses freaking out, it felt different, almost normal. Birds were singing, insects buzzing. If I hadn't been there yesterday, I might have thought Marcus and Jeremy were pulling my leg, but then we started looking around and things got weird again. We found broken branches on some of the trees along the path where the thing had been moving, branches that were 6 to 8 feet off the ground, way too high for deer or even a black bear to break. And then Marcus called us over to this muddy spot just off the trail. There, clear as day, was a footprint. But not like any footprint I'd ever seen. It was huge, maybe 15 inches long, with 5 toes spread wide apart. The impression was deep, like whatever made it was heavy. And there was another one a few feet away, and another beyond that. We followed the tracks for a while, taking pictures with Jeremy's disposable camera. I wonder whatever happened to those. Probably came out too blurry to show anything. The tracks led deeper into the woods, toward rockier terrain. Eventually we lost them among the rocks and thick brush. We spent hours out there, searching for more signs, but found nothing conclusive. Just those broken branches and the few tracks we'd managed to follow. We never saw the creature again, though I swear at one point I felt like we were being watched. That night, we told my dad what we'd seen. I expected him to laugh it off or tell us we were imagining things. Instead, he got real quiet and serious. He asked for details, exactly where we'd seen it, how big it was, how it moved. Then he told us a story about his own father, my grandfather, who'd had a similar encounter back in the 50s. How there were places in those woods the old-timers wouldn't go, areas they considered the territory of the wild people. I've been back to those woods hundreds of times since then. Never seen anything like what we saw that day. But sometimes, when I'm out there alone, I'll get that feeling again. The silence falling suddenly, the sense of being watched. And I'll remember the look of that thing, standing in the middle of the trail, staring at us with what felt like intelligence behind all that hair. I don't know what we saw that day. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, one of the wild people from my grandfather's stories, whatever you want to call it. But I know what I saw was real. Marcus and Jeremy know it too. We don't talk about it much anymore, but sometimes one of them will call me late at night and just say, "You still think about it?" And I always know exactly what they mean. 20 years later, and I still don't have an explanation, but I know what I saw. And I know those woods hold secrets that most people wouldn't believe. Story 7. I've been debating whether to share this for weeks now. Every time I go to type it up, I stop myself, thinking people will just laugh it off or call me crazy. But I need to tell someone who might understand, because this has been eating at me since it happened, and I'm not sleeping well anymore. It was March 28th, just a couple months back. I was heading to work early. I'm a supervisor at a manufacturing plant about 20 miles from my place, and I like to get in before everyone else to get paperwork done when it's quiet. My alarm went off at 4:30 that morning. I remember hitting snooze once, then dragging myself out of bed, making a quick cup of coffee, and heading out the door by 4:50. The drive from my house in Alger is usually peaceful that early. No traffic, just darkness, and the occasional deer on the side of the road. I've made this commute for 11 years now, so I know every curve, every dip in that stretch of highway. It's mostly farmland out here, hayfields, some livestock, patches of trees breaking up the landscape. Nothing ever changes much. That morning was foggy, the kind where it's not thick enough to slow you down, but just hangs low over the fields. My headlights cut through it, creating this tunnel of visibility. The radio was on low, some early morning talk show I wasn't really listening to. I was about 1.5 miles from my house when something made me slow down. At first, I thought it was a person standing in the road, maybe a broken down car somewhere and someone flagging for help. But as I got closer, maybe within 40 yards, I realized whatever was standing there was way too big to be a person. My first thought was bear, even though we don't get many around here. But this thing was standing upright, completely vertical, right in the middle of my lane. I eased off the gas, squinting through the windshield. The thing didn't move. Not at first. I flicked my high beams on, and that's when I saw it was holding something. Something limp. As I got closer, maybe 35 feet away now, it finally moved, stepping sideways into the ditch along the road with this smooth, deliberate motion. When my headlights fully caught it, I felt this cold wave wash over me. It was huge. I'm 6'1", and this thing had to be at least 7 feet tall, maybe more. But it wasn't just tall, it was massive, broad, solid, the kind of build that makes you immediately aware of how small your vehicle suddenly feels. What hit me next was what it was carrying. Cradled in its arms was what looked like a sheep or maybe a goat. I have neighbors who raise both, so it wasn't shocking to see one. What was shocking was how this thing was holding it like it weighed nothing, just cradled against its chest, the animal completely limp. I slowed almost to a stop when I reached where it was standing in the ditch. I don't know why I did that, curiosity or shock or some stupid impulse. That's when it turned and looked directly at me. I'll never forget that moment. Its face was covered in the same thick fur as its body. This strange mix of honey-colored patches blended with darker brown, almost black in places. Where its eyes should be, there were just these two dark areas, like holes in the fur. No whites, no reflection from my headlights, just darkness. We locked eyes, or whatever you'd call it, for maybe 3 seconds, but it felt like forever. I wasn't breathing. My hands were frozen on the wheel. It didn't make any aggressive moves, didn't growl or anything like that. It just assessed me, like it was deciding something. The whole encounter probably lasted less than 20 seconds total, but every detail is burned into my brain. The way its fur moved slightly in the breeze, how it stood completely steady even though it was on the uneven ground of the ditch. The way it held that animal with one arm, effortlessly, like I would hold a pillow. I finally snapped out of it when a car appeared in my rearview mirror, coming up fast behind me. I hit the gas without thinking and sped away. In my mirror, I could see the other car slowing as it reached that spot, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. I just wanted to get to work, to get to somewhere normal and lit up and filled with people. The whole drive there, my hands were shaking. I kept replaying what I'd seen, trying to make sense of it. A bear wouldn't stand like that. A person in a costume wouldn't be that big, wouldn't move that naturally, wouldn't be out in the middle of nowhere at 5 in the morning carrying a dead animal. It didn't make any sense. When I got to work, I sat in my car for 15 minutes trying to calm down. I didn't tell anyone there. How could I? Hey, I just saw Bigfoot with his breakfast. I'd never hear the end of it. So I went through my day in a daze, jumping at small noises, checking my phone for any local news about missing livestock or strange sightings. Nothing. That night, I took a different route home. I know that sounds ridiculous. It was daylight, and whatever I saw was probably long gone, but I couldn't face that stretch of road again. Not yet. I spent that evening researching online, looking up local wildlife, trying to convince myself it was just a bear, or maybe even a moose, though we don't get those here either. Nothing fit. I looked up Bigfoot sightings in Washington State. There are a lot, but nothing recent in Skagit County that I could find. I felt crazy, sitting there at 1 in the morning, my search history full of Sasquatch sightings and unexplained creatures Pacific Northwest. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those dark eye spots staring at me from that furred face. I kept thinking about that animal it was carrying. Where did it get it? What was it going to do with it? The next morning, I called in sick. I couldn't face that drive again, not yet. Instead, I waited until about 10 a.m. and called the county sheriff's office. The woman who answered was nice enough, didn't laugh when I explained what I'd seen, though I could tell she was skeptical. She said they'd send someone out to check the area. A deputy called me back that afternoon. He'd gone out there, walked the hayfield next to where I'd seen the thing, checked the ditch, looked for tracks or fur or anything. He found nothing. He wasn't condescending about it, just matter of fact. The ground was mostly dry sod, he explained, not the kind that would show footprints easily. And without rain, there was no mud to preserve tracks. He asked if I wanted to file a formal report. I declined. What was the point? It's been almost 2 months now, and I still think about it every day. I've driven that route since then, always in daylight, always with a tight feeling in my chest. But I've never seen anything like it again. I've talked to a few of my neighbors, casually asking if they've noticed anything strange or if any of their animals have gone missing. No one's reported anything unusual. I've lived in this area my whole life. I know what bears look like, what elk look like, what people in hunting gear look like. This wasn't any of those things. The size alone rules those out. This thing was massive, solid muscle under that fur. The way it moved was unlike anything I've seen. Smooth, deliberate, powerful. And those eyes, those dark voids where eyes should be. That's what keeps me up at night. The rational part of my brain keeps trying to explain it away. Maybe it was just a weird shadow effect from my headlights. Maybe I was more tired than I realized. Maybe it was some kind of bizarre prank. But deep down, I know what I saw. It was real. It was there. And it was carrying that animal like it was nothing. I think about how it just watched me. It could have easily approached my car. I was practically stopped right in front of it. But it didn't. It just observed, like it was as curious about me as I was about it. I haven't told anyone else about this until now. My wife would worry. My co-workers would never let me hear the end of it. But I needed to get this off my chest, to tell someone who might understand, or who might have seen something similar. I drive that stretch of road differently now. I'm always scanning the tree lines, the ditches, the fields. I don't drive it before dawn anymore. I've changed my schedule at work. I keep a better flashlight in my car. I'm not afraid exactly, but I'm aware, more aware than I've ever been, that there are things out there we can't explain. Sometimes I wonder if it's still out there, moving through those fields at night, watching the cars go by. And sometimes, when I can't sleep at 3 in the morning, I wonder if it recognized something in me the same way I recognize something inexplicable in it. Like for that brief moment, we understood something about each other that I still can't put into words. Story 8. I've always considered myself a pretty level-headed person. I'm not one for ghost stories or crazy conspiracy theories, but something happened to me last month that I still can't explain, and I need to get it off my chest. I've barely told anyone because I know how it sounds, but I swear every word of this is true. My friend Kelly has this beautiful old property about 20 minutes outside of Pine Ridge, this tiny tourist town nestled in the mountains. She needed someone to house sit while she went to visit her sister for 2 weeks. The main house is this gorgeous stone building that's over 100 years old. But she told me I could stay in the small cabin at the edge of the property since I was bringing my 2 dogs, Max and Bella. The cabin was cute, rustic but comfortable, with a small kitchen, living room, bedroom and bathroom. It sat right at the edge of her 5 acres, where the manicured gardens meet the wilderness. The first day was totally normal. I arrived around noon, and Kelly showed me around before heading out. The cabin had this cool, vintage charm with wooden floors and walls, a little potbelly, stove, and these big windows that looked out into the trees. There was even a small dog door installed, so my dogs could go in and out to the fenced portion of the yard. I settled in, unpacked my stuff, and spent the afternoon reading on the porch while the dogs explored their temporary home. That night, everything changed. I'd gone to bed around 11, with Max curled up at my feet and Bella in her bed on the floor. I must have been asleep for a couple hours when something woke me up. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but then I heard it clearly, a slow, deliberate crunching sound moving through the dried leaves outside. Fall had just started, and there were leaves everywhere, so the sound was unmistakable. I lay there frozen, listening as whatever it was seemed to be moving directly toward the cabin. It wasn't the quick scampering of a raccoon or the light steps of a deer. This was heavy, methodical, and purposeful. Then my dog started reacting in a way I'd never seen before. Max, my usually brave German Shepherd mix, jumped off the bed and started growling low in his throat. Bella, my sweet little beagle who wouldn't hurt a fly, joined him. They both went straight to the screen door and stood there with their hackles raised, growling with a ferocity that sent chills down my spine. My heart was pounding as I got out of bed and crept toward the door. The crunching sounds had stopped, but I could feel something was out there just on the other side of that thin screen. I didn't look outside. I was too terrified. Instead, I quickly locked the door and pulled the curtains shut over all the windows. For what felt like hours, my dogs continued to growl at the door. I sat on the couch with all the lights on, clutching my phone, ready to call for help if needed. Eventually, around 4 in the morning, the dogs finally calmed down, and I managed to fall into an uneasy sleep. When morning came, I almost convinced myself I'd overreacted. But when I finally worked up, the courage to step outside, I saw something that made my stomach drop. There was a wide path through the fallen leaves leading directly to my door. It wasn't like an animal trail. It looked like something had dragged its feet while walking, sweeping the leaves aside in a path about 3 feet wide. And there was this strange smell lingering in the air, musky and wild, but fading in the morning sun. I called Kelly and casually asked if there were any large animals in the area. Bears, maybe. She laughed and said no, nothing dangerous. Maybe the occasional deer or coyote, but nothing to worry about. I didn't tell her what happened. I figured I'd sound crazy, and honestly, I was still trying to rationalize it myself. The second night passed without incident. I slept poorly, jumping at every sound, but nothing approached the cabin. By the third day, I'd almost convinced myself that I'd imagined the whole thing, or that it had just been some local wildlife that my city-raised dogs weren't used to. Then came the third night. I was fast asleep when Max and Bella's growling woke me again. The digital clock on the nightstand read 2:15 in the morning. This time their growling was different. There was fear mixed with the aggression. After a moment, they both bolted into the bathroom and huddled in the shower stall, still growling but clearly terrified. I sat up in bed, my heart hammering in my chest. The cabin was dark, except for the moonlight filtering through the curtains. As my eyes adjusted, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The flap of the dog door was pushed inward slightly, as if something was pressing against it from the outside. I could just make out the silhouette blocking the moonlight that should have been shining through the clear plastic flap, something with very thick, heavy legs. I was too terrified to move. Whatever was at the dog door seemed to realize it couldn't fit through, because after a minute, the pressure released and the flap fell back into place. Then I heard heavy footsteps circling around to the window near my bed. That's when I heard the sound, a low, unearthly moaning that rose into something between a howl and a scream. It wasn't like any animal I'd ever heard. It vibrated through the walls of the cabin and into my bones. I've never been so terrified in my life. With shaking hands, I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. I whispered frantically to the dispatcher, terrified that whatever was outside would hear me. The dispatcher kept me on the line while she sent a deputy out. Those 20 minutes waiting were the longest of my life. The creature stayed outside the window, occasionally making that horrible sound or tapping on the glass. I was huddled in the corner of the bedroom, as far from the windows as I could get, with the blanket pulled over my head like a child. When the deputy's car finally pulled up, lights flashing, the creature must have fled, because by the time he knocked on my door, there was no sign of it. Deputy Williams was kind but clearly skeptical. He walked around the property with his flashlight, but found nothing except some disturbed areas in the garden soil that he attributed to deer. I was too scared to stay in the cabin. I threw some clothes in a bag, gathered my still trembling dogs, and told the deputy I was going to drive around until sunrise. He looked concerned, but didn't try to stop me. As I drove through town, something caught my eye, a figure standing in the shadows between two buildings. I slowed down, thinking it might be the peeping Tom that had been reported in the local paper recently. When I squinted, the figure ducked away. I circled back and called the sheriff's office again, and Deputy Williams said he'd check it out. I still wasn't ready to go back to the cabin, so I kept driving along the mountain roads. It was around 3:30 in the morning, and the roads were completely deserted. I was on a particularly dark stretch of highway when my headlights illuminated something that made me slam on the brakes. Standing in the middle of the road, about 50 yards ahead, was a massive, human-like figure covered in dark hair or fur. It had to be at least 7 feet tall, with broad shoulders and long arms that hung down past its knees. As my truck skidded to a stop, it turned to face me, and I saw its eyes catch the light, glowing a reddish-amber color like nothing I've ever seen. I sat there, paralyzed with fear, as the creature and I stared at each other. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only seconds, it stepped to the side of the road. My brain was screaming at me to reverse, to get away, but I was afraid to take my eyes off it. Instead, I pressed down on the gas, intending to speed past it. As I accelerated, the creature did something I'll never forget. It reached out one massive arm and struck the side of my pickup as I passed. The whole truck shuddered from the impact. Then it let out that deep-throated howl, the exact same sound I'd heard outside the cabin. In my rearview mirror, I could see it loping after my truck, keeping pace until I hit about 45 miles per hour. Then it veered off into the woods and disappeared. I drove straight to a 24-hour diner on the highway and stayed there until morning, my dog still trembling in the back seat. When daylight came, I reluctantly returned to Kelly's property to figure out what to do next. I decided to check the area where Deputy Williams had noticed the disturbed soil, and that's when I found it. A huge footprint, over 16 inches long, pressed deep into the wet garden soil. It had 5 toes and looked disturbingly human-like, only massive. I took photos with my phone, then erased the print with a rake. I couldn't bring myself to stay in the cabin again, so I moved my things to the main house, telling myself I'd be safer there. That afternoon, Kelly's neighbors, who were staying in her guest house, called me in a panic. They'd seen something large trying to get into the cabin. By the time Deputy Williams arrived again, whatever it was had torn the screen door completely off its hinges. The next day, I forced myself to go back to the cabin to retrieve some things I'd forgotten. While there, something compelled me to check the small attic space. I'm not sure why. Using a chair to reach the pull-down ladder, I climbed up and shone my flashlight around. At first, I just saw the usual junk. Old boxes, Christmas decorations, dusty furniture. But then my light caught something tucked in the corner under an old blanket. It was a skull, but not human, not animal. It was massive, with an elongated crest on top, huge eye sockets, and a powerful jaw with smooth yellowish teeth. It was covered in dust and cobwebs, clearly untouched for decades. In that moment, everything clicked. The creature had been coming for the skull. Somehow, it knew it was there. I carefully wrapped the skull in a sheet and left it by the cabin door that night. Around 2 in the morning, after a brief run-in with the actual peeping Tom, who turned out to be a local kid Deputy Williams caught, I heard the familiar crunching of leaves. From the safety of the main house, I watched through the window as the creature approached the cabin. It stood there in the moonlight, over 7 feet tall, its reddish-amber eyes glowing as it looked toward where I was watching. Despite my terror, I felt drawn to the moment. I cracked open the door of the main house and called out, "It's yours, big fellow." My voice was barely a whisper, but somehow it heard me. The creature picked up the wrapped skull with one massive arm, clutching it to its chest. For a long moment, it stared at me, and I had the strangest feeling of connection, of understanding between two completely different species. Then it turned and walked away into the forest, taking the skull with it. I left the next day. I couldn't stay there anymore, even though I knew it wouldn't be coming back. Deputy Williams called later to tell me they'd found more footprints in the area, but no other sign of the creature. I don't know what I encountered that night. Locals might call it Bigfoot or Sasquatch, but those names seem too simple for what I experienced. All I know is that it wanted something that belonged to it, and once it had it, it left. I still have the photos of the footprint, though they don't really capture how massive it was in person. Kelly still doesn't know what happened at her property. I told her a bear had damaged the screen door. I don't think she'd believe the truth. I'm not sure I would, if I hadn't lived it myself. Story 9. Sis, I've never told this story publicly before. After all these years, I still get goosebumps thinking about what happened that summer day in 1991. I'm not someone who believes in the supernatural or goes looking for the unexplained. I was, and still am, a practical person who needs evidence before believing in something. But what I saw that day on Highway 20 west of Omak completely shattered my understanding of what exists in our world. It was late July, and I was driving alone through Washington State. I'd taken some vacation time to explore the North Cascades National Park, something I'd been wanting to do for years. The weather was perfect that day, warm enough to have the windows down, but not so hot that I needed the AC blasting. I remember feeling so peaceful as I navigated the winding mountain roads, with nothing but my thoughts and the radio keeping me company. Highway 20 in that area is pretty remote. It's this narrow, twisting road that cuts through dense forest, the kind of place where you might not see another car for 20 or 30 minutes at a time. I was taking it slow, probably around 50 kilometers per hour, just enjoying the scenery and the freedom of being away from the city. I'd been driving for about 2 hours when I first spotted it. At first, I thought it was just some weird shadow or maybe a fallen tree trunk on the right side of the road ahead. But as I got closer, I realized it was something else entirely. It was this massive gray-haired figure sitting on the ground, maybe 100 meters ahead. My first thought was bear, probably a grizzly, or maybe one of those cinnamon-faced black bears. I immediately eased off the gas pedal, not wanting to startle it. As I slowed down and got within about 30 or 40 meters, something happened that I still can't fully process. This thing, this creature, suddenly moved. And the way it moved, it wasn't like anything I'd ever seen before. It wasn't lumbering like a bear. It was fluid, deliberate, fast, unnervingly fast. In one smooth motion, it rose up from its sitting position and crossed the road directly in front of my car. I hit the brakes hard, my heart practically jumping out of my chest. Time seemed to slow down as I watched this thing move across my field of vision. The most unsettling part? It never dropped to all fours. Not once. It ran upright the entire time, with this strange but efficient gait that was disturbingly human-like, yet not quite human. When it reached the other side of the road, it did something that still haunts me. It stopped and turned to look at me. Just looked at me. I was still rolling forward slowly, and as I passed by where it stood, I felt a cold wave of fear, unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It was like my body knew I was in the presence of something that shouldn't exist, before my mind could even process what I was seeing. This thing was enormous. I'm not exaggerating when I say it must have been at least 8 feet tall. Its build was lean but incredibly muscular, not bulky like a bodybuilder, but powerful, like it could tear a tree trunk in half without much effort. I'd guess it weighed somewhere between 200 to 300 kilograms. Its entire body was covered in this dark, tangled hair. Not matted or mangy like a sick animal, but natural looking, like that was just how it grew. The whole encounter lasted maybe 15 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. I wasn't able to make out specific facial features because everything happened so fast. And honestly, I think part of me didn't want to see its face. But what struck me most was how deliberate its movements were. This wasn't some frightened animal darting across the road. It moved with purpose, and it showed absolutely no fear of me or my vehicle. After I passed it, I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I didn't dare look in my rearview mirror right away. When I finally did, after driving another 100 meters or so, there was nothing there. Either it had disappeared back into the dense forest, or I don't know. Part of me wondered if I'd imagined the whole thing, but the pounding of my heart and the cold sweat on my forehead told me otherwise. For the next hour, I drove in a state of shock. My mind kept replaying what I'd seen, trying to make sense of it. Was it a bear that just looked weird from that angle? No, bears don't run like that. Was it a person in some kind of costume, in the middle of nowhere, moving with that kind of speed and agility? No way. Could it have been some undiscovered species? Some kind of primitive human that had somehow survived in the remote wilderness? The questions kept circling in my head, but I had no answers. I almost turned around. Part of me wanted to go back and see if I could find any evidence, footprints, hair, anything. But a stronger part of me, the survival instinct, I guess, kept me driving forward. Whatever that thing was, I didn't want to encounter it again, especially not alone. When I finally reached a small town a couple hours later, I stopped at a diner just to be around other people. I remember sitting there with a cup of coffee that I barely touched, debating whether to tell someone. The waitress asked if I was okay. Apparently I looked as shaken as I felt. I almost told her, but then what? Hey, I just saw a giant hairy creature in the woods that runs like a human but definitely isn't one. I'd sound insane, so I just blamed it on fatigue from the long drive and kept it to myself. That night at the motel, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that thing turning to look at me. I kept replaying the encounter, analyzing every detail I could remember, the way it moved, its size, the color and texture of its hair, the deliberate way it crossed the road, almost like it wanted me to see it. The next morning, I went to a local library. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for until I found myself in the section about local folklore and wildlife. That's when I first came across information about Bigfoot or Sasquatch. As I flipped through the books, looking at blurry photographs and reading eyewitness accounts, a chill ran down my spine. The descriptions matched what I'd seen: the height, the coloration, the distinctive movement pattern. I'd always dismissed Bigfoot as a myth, something created to sell tabloid newspapers or attract tourists. But sitting there, reading account after account that described details so similar to what I'd witnessed, I couldn't dismiss it anymore. These people had seen something real. Something that shouldn't exist according to science, but did. The rest of my vacation was a blur. I still went to North Cascades National Park as planned, but I couldn't enjoy it. Every rustle in the bushes, every snapping twig made me jump. I found myself constantly scanning the tree line, half expecting to see that massive figure watching me from the shadows. I cut my trip short and headed home 3 days earlier than planned. When I got back, I told my husband what had happened. He listened patiently, but I could see the skepticism in his eyes. He suggested maybe it was a stress hallucination from the long drive, or that perhaps I dozed off for a few seconds behind the wheel. I almost wished he was right, but I knew what I'd seen. Over the next few months, I did research. Lots of it. I read books about Bigfoot sightings, joined online forums where people shared their experiences, even contacted a couple of researchers who specialized in cryptozoology. Most of what I found was clearly hoaxes or misidentifications, but there were accounts, like mine, that couldn't be so easily explained away. One detail that kept coming up in the more credible sightings was the same thing that had struck me. The way these creatures move. That fluid, upright gait that's almost human but just off somehow. Too efficient, too powerful. Several witnesses described the same thing I'd seen, a being that crossed open spaces with startling speed and then simply vanished into the forest. I found out that the area where I had my sighting is actually known for Sasquatch encounters. The remote forests of Washington state, especially around the Cascade Range, have a long history of reported sightings going back to indigenous legends. Knowing this didn't make me feel better. If anything, it made the experience more real, more terrifying. For a while, I became obsessed with finding answers. I considered going back to that stretch of Highway 20, but something always stopped me. Fear, maybe. Or the knowledge that even if I did go back, the chances of seeing it again were practically zero. These beings, whatever they are, don't want to be found. It's been over 30 years now since that day. I've told very few people about what happened. Most react with polite disbelief or change the subject. A few have shared their own strange experiences in return. I've learned to live with the uncertainty, with knowing that I encountered something that science says doesn't exist. Sometimes I wonder if it recognized me as human, if there was some level of intelligence behind those eyes that watched me drive past. Was it curious about me? Territorial? Just going about its day when I happened to disturb it? I'll never know. What I do know is that there are things in this world that defy explanation, things that exist in the shadows of our understanding. That day on Highway 20 changed me. It opened my eyes to the possibility that our neat, orderly view of nature, with its carefully categorized species and evolutionary trees, might not be as complete as we think. I still love the outdoors. I still go hiking and camping, but I do it differently now, more aware, more alert, and yes, sometimes more afraid. Because once you've seen something like that, something that shouldn't exist but undeniably does, you can never unsee it. You can never go back to not knowing. Sometimes, when I'm in the woods and it gets quiet, that special kind of quiet where even the birds stop singing, I feel like I'm being watched. And I wonder if it's out there, moving silently through the trees, just beyond where my eyes can see. Story 10. It's been over 40 years, but I can still feel my heart race when I think about that night in '78. Bobby and I had only been married for 3 months. We were so excited about our little place in Orange County, our first home together. It wasn't much, just a small 2-bedroom house on the edge of the woods, but it was ours. We'd saved for the down payment for almost a year before the wedding, working extra shifts at the paper mill and cutting corners wherever we could. The trouble started about 2 weeks after we moved in. At first, it was just strange noises at night, scratching sounds coming from outside the windows. Bobby said it was probably just raccoons or possums. We lived right up against the woods, after all. Made sense we'd have critters around. But then the sounds changed. I still remember waking up around 2 in the morning to what sounded like howling, not like a normal dog or coyote, but something different. It was deeper, more guttural, and it had this strange cadence to it, almost like it was trying to speak. Bobby heard it too, and I could feel him tense up beside me. Neither of us said anything, but I knew we were both thinking the same thing. That didn't sound like any animal we knew. The next morning, we found the first window screen damaged, like something had been clawing at it, trying to get in. Bobby fixed it that same day, but he looked worried. He told me to make sure I locked all the doors and windows when he was at work. I'd never seen him so concerned before. For the next few nights, we'd hear those sounds again. That weird howling mixed with yelping, and always the scratching at the screens. It got to where I couldn't sleep. I'd just lie there in bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting for those sounds to start up again. Bobby tried to act brave for my sake, but I could tell he was scared too. On June 18th, I'll never forget that date. Things went from bad to worse. It was a Sunday morning, and we were planning to go to church. I got up early to make breakfast while Bobby went to feed our dogs. We had 3 of them. Rusty, a German Shepherd mix we'd had since we got engaged. Bella, a beagle that Bobby's mum had given us as a wedding present. And Max, a mutt we'd rescued from the shelter a few weeks after moving in. I was just cracking eggs into a pan when I heard Bobby yelling from the yard. I ran outside, still holding the spatula, and found him standing near the edge of the property, looking down at something. When I got closer, I saw what it was, and I felt my stomach turn. Our dogs were dead, all 3 of them lying there in the tall grass near the tree line. At first I thought maybe they'd been hit by cars or shot by hunters, but there was no blood. They were just dead, with these strange expressions on their faces, like they'd died scared. Rusty's eyes were wide open, staring at nothing, and his teeth were bared like he'd been trying to fight something off. The other 2 looked the same, like they'd been terrified when they died. Bobby checked them over, looking for wounds or anything that might explain what happened, but he couldn't find anything obvious. No bite marks, no bullet holes. It was like they'd just dropped dead from fear. We were devastated. Those dogs were like our children. We spent most of the morning burying them in the backyard. I cried the whole time, and Bobby was so quiet, just methodically digging the holes and laying our pets to rest. We missed church, of course. I couldn't bear the thought of being around people, trying to act normal when I felt so unsettled. That evening, we sat at the kitchen table, barely touching our dinner. Bobby finally broke the silence. "I think something killed our dogs," he said. "And I think it's the same thing that's been scratching at our windows at night." I nodded, too scared to voice what I was thinking, that whatever it was, it might come for us next. "I'm going to wait up tonight," Bobby said, his voice firm with determination. "I'm going to see what this thing is." I begged him not to, told him we should call the sheriff instead, but Bobby was stubborn. He'd always been protective, and now, with our dogs dead, he felt like he needed to defend what was left, me and our home. After dinner, Bobby got his daddy's old double-barreled shotgun from the closet and loaded it. He made me promise to lock myself in our bedroom while he kept watch from the living room. I was too terrified to argue. I didn't sleep. How could I? I just lay there in our bed, listening for any sound from outside or from the living room where Bobby was waiting. Around midnight, the scratching started again, this time at multiple windows around the house. I heard Bobby moving through the living room, following the sounds. Then I heard the back door open. My heart nearly stopped. I wanted to call out to Bobby, to tell him to come back inside, but I was frozen with fear. For what felt like an eternity, there was silence. Then I heard it, a sound I can only describe as a mix between a growl and a moan, but so loud it seemed to vibrate through the walls of the house. Then came the shotgun blast, so sudden and deafening that I screamed. A second shot followed almost immediately. I leapt from the bed and ran to the door, throwing it open just as Bobby came rushing down the hallway toward me, his face white as a sheet. He slammed our bedroom door shut behind him and locked it, then pushed our dresser in front of it for good measure. "What happened?" I whispered, my voice shaking. "What did you see?" Bobby was breathing hard, his hands trembling as he reloaded the shotgun. "I don't know what it was," he said, his voice barely audible, "but it wasn't human, Becky. It wasn't human." He told me he'd heard the scratching at the kitchen window and had gone out the back door to investigate. At first, he didn't see anything, but then something moved at the edge of the woods. In the moonlight, he made out a large, shaggy figure standing upright, at least 6 feet tall, maybe more. It was muscular, covered in dark hair, with long arms that hung down past its knees. When it saw Bobby, it started walking toward him, not running, just walking deliberately like it wasn't afraid. That's when Bobby fired both barrels. He said he didn't know if he hit it, but it paused for a moment before continuing to advance. That's when Bobby turned and ran back inside. We called the sheriff's office right away. Bobby's hands were shaking so bad that I had to dial the number. The dispatcher seemed skeptical, but said they'd send someone out. While we waited, huddled together in our bedroom with the shotgun pointed at the door, we kept hearing those sounds: scratching, growling, and something that sounded like heavy footsteps circling the house. Deputy Jack Reeves arrived about 45 minutes later. I'd never been so relieved to hear a car pulling into our driveway. We heard him knocking at the front door, calling out that it was the sheriff's department. Bobby moved the dresser away from our bedroom door, and we cautiously made our way to let Deputy Reeves in. He looked skeptical as Bobby recounted what had happened, but he agreed to take a look around. First, he examined the window screens. All of them had been damaged, with long claw marks that Deputy Reeves admitted didn't look like they'd been made by any normal wildlife. Then we showed him where our dogs had been found. Though we'd buried them, the depressions in the grass were still visible. As we stood there at the edge of our property, Deputy Reeves suddenly went still. His hand moved to his service revolver, and he stared intently toward the tree line. "There's something in those woods," he said quietly. Bobby and I both turned to look, and that's when I saw it. A massive, dark figure standing between two pine trees, just visible in the moonlight. It was exactly as Bobby had described: tall, covered in dark hair, with unnaturally long arms. I couldn't make out its face clearly, but I had the distinct impression it was watching us. Deputy Reeves drew his gun and shouted for it to come out with its hands up, like he thought it might be a person in some kind of costume. But the way it moved, no human moves like that. It backed deeper into the woods, not running, just smoothly retreating until it disappeared into the darkness. Deputy Reeves tried to act calm, but I could see he was shaken. "I'll call this in," he said, his voice not quite steady. "We'll get some more officers out here to search the woods." But Bobby and I were done. While Deputy Reeves made his call from his patrol car, we looked at each other and knew without speaking that we couldn't stay there another night. We threw some clothes and essentials into suitcases, grabbed our photo albums and the small lockbox with our important papers, and told Deputy Reeves we were leaving. He didn't try to stop us. In fact, he offered to follow us to make sure we got safely to my parents' house, about 20 miles away. I remember looking back at our little home as we drove away, seeing it get smaller in the rearview mirror. All our furniture was still there, our wedding gifts, everything we'd worked so hard for. But none of it mattered compared to our safety. We never went back to live there. Bobby returned once in broad daylight and with my father and two of my brothers to retrieve more of our belongings. They said everything seemed normal, but they all felt watched the entire time, like something was just waiting for them to let their guard down. We eventually sold the house for much less than we'd paid, just to be rid of it. The locals started calling it the Bigfoot house, and parents would warn their kids to stay away from the area. I've heard stories over the years of other people experiencing strange things around there, missing pets, damaged property, those same eerie howls at night. Bobby and I never really talked about what happened after the first few months. It was like we both wanted to pretend it never occurred, but sometimes I'd catch him staring out windows at night, especially when we'd hear coyotes or other animals in the distance. And I still have nightmares. Dreams where I'm back in that house, alone, hearing those scratches at the windows getting louder and louder until they become pounding, and then the glass breaks. I don't know what was in those woods that night. I don't want to know. All I know is that 40-some years later, I still get chills when I drive through Orange County, and I've never again lived in a house that borders the woods. Some things you just can't forget, no matter how much time passes. And some places you just know you should never go back to. Story 11. I haven't told many people about this. My wife knows, obviously, but I've kept it pretty quiet otherwise. I'm only writing this down now because it's been almost 8 months, and I still wake up in cold sweats thinking about it. Maybe getting it all out will help. Back in May, I inherited the job of clearing out my Aunt Lynn's property after she passed. It wasn't something I was looking forward to. She lived out in the sticks in Tippecanoe, Ohio, in this old farmhouse that had been neglected for years before she died. The place was about 2 hours from where my wife and I live in Columbus, and to be honest, I'd only been there a handful of times growing up. My wife couldn't come with me that weekend because of work commitments, so I went alone, planning to spend Saturday and Sunday getting as much done as possible. I remember driving up that gravel driveway around noon on Saturday, seeing how the weeds had completely taken over. The house itself was structurally sound, but everything around it had gone wild. The backyard was basically a jungle that bled into the woods beyond. I spent most of Saturday hacking away at the overgrowth with a machete and chainsaw I'd brought. It was exhausting work, especially since I'm not exactly outdoorsy. I work in IT, and the most strenuous thing I usually do is carry groceries. By late afternoon, I had created several huge brush piles and cleared about 15 feet behind the house. Throughout the day, I kept getting this weird sensation that I was being watched. I'd stop sometimes, feeling the hair on my arms stand up and look around, but never saw anything. I chalked it up to being a city guy alone in the country. The property backed up to a large forest, and across the road was another massive wooded area. It was the kind of isolation I wasn't used to. After showering, I heated up some canned soup I'd brought and sat out on the back patio with a beer. The sun was setting, and despite being tired, I was feeling pretty good about the progress I'd made. That's when I first heard it. This strange whooping sound coming from the woods behind the property. At first, I thought maybe it was someone calling their dog or something. But then another similar call answered from the forest across the road. The calls continued for about 20 minutes as darkness fell. I actually found them kind of soothing, thinking they were probably just owls or some other night birds. The sounds eventually stopped, and I went inside to set up my sleeping bag in what used to be Aunt Lynn's bedroom. I left the window cracked since the night was cool and pleasant. I fell asleep quickly, but woke up around 4:30 in the morning. Something had disturbed me, though I couldn't pinpoint what. The room was dark, but I could see the first hints of dawn creeping in. I knew I wouldn't fall back asleep, so I decided to make some coffee and enjoy the early morning on the patio. The backyard was covered in a thick fog that morning, giving everything this eerie, otherworldly quality. I could barely see the brush piles I'd made about 15 feet away. I remember sitting there with my coffee, enjoying the silence and thinking how peaceful it was. That peace didn't last long. I heard movement in one of the brush piles, the rustling of branches and leaves. My first thought was raccoons, or maybe a deer that had wandered into the yard. I was about to get up for a better look when a loud whooping call erupted from somewhere in the fog. It wasn't like the calls from the previous evening. This was much louder, much more powerful. I froze, coffee mug halfway to my lips. Before I could process what I'd heard, another whooping call answered, but this one came from my left, from the side of the house. It was so loud and so close that I physically flinched. I turned instinctively toward the sound, and that's when I saw it. Standing at the edge of the patio, maybe 10 feet away from me, was this thing. I still struggle with how to describe it accurately. It was around 6 feet tall, barrel-chested, and covered in dark, matted hair. It wasn't a bear, it was standing upright on 2 legs. Its arms hung down to about mid-thigh, and its hands looked almost human but larger, with thick fingers. The face is what I remember most clearly. Not quite human, not quite ape. A pronounced brow ridge shadowed deep-set eyes that were fixed directly on me. Its nose was wide and flat, and its mouth was slightly open, showing teeth. The smell hit me too, like wet dog mixed with something musky and wild. It had walked along the side of the house and onto the patio, but clearly hadn't noticed me sitting there until I moved. We both froze, staring at each other. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I just sat there, gripping my coffee mug so hard, I'm surprised it didn't shatter. The creature shifted its weight slightly, leaning forward a bit, and I swear to God it looked like it was deciding whether to charge at me or run away. That's when I heard heavy footsteps coming through the fog from the direction of the brush piles, accompanied by short, sharp whistles. The creature in front of me immediately responded with rapid staccato whistles of its own, all while keeping its eyes locked on me. After this brief exchange, the creature gave me one final look. I still can't interpret what was behind those eyes. Then turned and walked into the fog, with these long, fluid strides that no human could mimic. I could hear its footsteps receding, joined by what sounded like at least one other set of heavy footfalls. When I couldn't hear them anymore, the paralysis that had gripped me finally broke. My hands were shaking so badly that I dropped my coffee mug on the patio, where it shattered. My legs felt like jelly as I scrambled inside, locking the door behind me. I grabbed the shotgun I'd brought for protection. I'm not even a gun person, but my father-in-law had insisted I take it to the middle of nowhere, and sat with my back against the wall where I could see both, the front and back doors. I stayed like that for hours, jumping at every sound, convinced they were going to come back. When the fog finally cleared around 9 in the morning, I looked out the windows and saw no signs of the creatures, no footprints, nothing disturbed. The only evidence something had happened was my broken coffee mug on the patio. I threw my stuff in the car and drove home in a daze, going well over the speed limit the whole way. When I got back, my wife took one look at me and knew something was wrong. I told her everything, and I could see in her eyes that she didn't believe me. She suggested I was tired, that maybe I'd fallen asleep on the patio and had a vivid dream. I refused to go back to the property. Instead, I hired a professional crew to clear it out and get it ready to sell, which cost us a fortune we didn't really have. For months, my wife made these little snide comments about me seeing Bigfoot, rolling her eyes whenever the subject came up. But the nightmares I was having and my absolute refusal to continue with our retirement plans to buy a cabin in rural southern Ohio eventually convinced her that something genuinely traumatic had happened to me, whether it was what I described or not. I've since done research online, looking for similar experiences in that area. Tippecanoe and the surrounding forests have a history of strange sightings going back decades. Some locals call them Ohio grassmen rather than Bigfoot. I found reports of similar vocalizations, the whoops and whistles, from others who've had encounters. What terrifies me most isn't just what I saw, but the intelligence behind it. These weren't mindless animals. They were communicating. They were coordinating. And that one standing on the patio was assessing me, thinking about me, making decisions. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd been alone there, without another one of those creatures calling from the fog. Would it have approached me, attacked me? I still haven't gone back to finish clearing out the house. The property remains unsold. My wife has stopped mentioning it altogether, and sometimes I catch her looking at me with this mixture of concern and confusion, like she's trying to reconcile the rational person she married with the man who now refuses to go camping or hiking in the woods. I don't know what I saw that morning in the fog. I don't want to know. But whatever it was, it changed something fundamental in me. There are things in this world that we pretend don't exist because it's easier that way. I used to be one of those people. Now I keep the blinds closed at night, and I never, ever sleep with the windows open. Story 12. I still can't sleep properly after what happened last month. My son Jake and I had been planning this camping trip for ages, just the two of us heading into Colorado's wet mountains. He'd just turned 18, and with college coming up in the fall, I wanted some father-son time before he left. We decided to drive through the night to maximize our time in the mountains. Jake slept most of the way while I drove, the highway empty except for the occasional semi. Around 3 in the morning, we turned off the main road and started winding our way up this Forest Service road near Ophir Creek. The darkness was absolute out there, no streetlights, no houses, just my headlights cutting through the pitch black. I was tired but alert, running on gas station coffee and the excitement of finally getting away from work stress. We were looking for a decent spot to set up camp, preferably near water. The road twisted through dense pine forest, occasionally opening to reveal the massive silhouettes of mountains against the night sky. Around 4 a.m., we came across this private campground. Seemed decent enough from what I could see in the dark, but as we pulled in, my headlights swept across these hand-painted signs nailed to trees. Government stay out and patriots only, that kind of thing. Jake and I exchanged a glance, and without saying anything, I put the truck in reverse. No way we were staying somewhere that felt that hostile. Let's try Blue Lakes, I suggested, remembering a spot I'd read about online that was supposed to be beneath Greenhorn Mountain. Jake nodded, already half asleep again. We continued driving, the road finally straightening out after miles of curves. My eyes were getting heavy, and I was starting to think we should just pull over somewhere and sleep in the truck until morning, when something caught my attention. About 20 yards from the road was this small stand of pine trees. Nothing unusual about that, except I noticed an orange light among them. It pulsed, fading in and out like someone taking a drag on a cigarette. My first thought was another camper, maybe someone having a late-night smoke, but something felt off. As we got closer, I noticed movement, not like trees swaying in the wind. This was different, something shifting its position. I slowed down slightly, still thinking it might be a person, maybe a hiker who'd set up camp for the night. The headlights weren't pointing directly at the trees, just catching them at an angle, so I couldn't make out details. I was actually about to speed up and continue on when Jake suddenly sat upright. "Dad," he said, his voice tight, "look, by that rock." I followed his gaze. About 10 to 15 feet off the road was a large boulder, maybe 4 feet tall, and partially concealed behind it, standing upright, was something. My truck was still moving, and as we passed, the angle changed. That's when I saw it clearly. Its torso, shoulders, and head visible above the rock. The lower half remained hidden, but I could immediately tell that whatever this was, it was much taller than any person I'd ever encountered. I can't really describe the feeling that washed over me. It wasn't just fear. It was this primal recognition that I was seeing something that shouldn't exist. My brain was trying to categorize it as a person, but everything about its proportions was wrong. The worst part was that it was watching us, intently. Its head and upper body actually turned to follow our truck as we passed. I felt the hairs rise on my arms and neck. My instinct was to slow down, maybe to get a better look, I don't know, but then I felt this overwhelming urge to keep moving. Don't stop, don't engage, just drive. The entire sighting couldn't have lasted more than 30 seconds. Neither of us spoke until we were well past that stretch of road. "Did you see that?" Jake finally whispered, still staring out the rear window. I nodded, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Yeah, I saw it." "What the hell was it? A bear standing up?" I shook my head. Bears don't stand that tall, and they certainly don't watch you with that kind of intelligence. This thing had been deliberately hiding its lower half behind that rock, observing us from a position of concealment. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I don't think we should go back there right now." We drove another 2 miles before finding a clearing by a creek that seemed like a good campsite. I pulled in, but left the engine running. Neither of us made a move to get out. "Should we set up the tent?" Jake asked after a while. I checked the time, almost 4:30 in the morning. The sky was still completely dark. "Let's wait for daylight," I said. We both reclined our seats and tried to sleep, but I don't think either of us actually did. I kept seeing that figure in my mind, the way it had moved to watch us pass. The orange light pulsing in the trees. When the first grey light of dawn finally appeared around 5:30, we were both wide awake. We set up camp in silence, neither of us mentioning what we'd seen, as if talking about it might somehow make it worse. But after we got the tent up and started a fire for breakfast, Jake finally brought it up. "We should go back and look," he said, "in daylight." Part of me wanted to pretend it hadn't happened, to just enjoy our camping trip and forget about the whole thing. But I knew we'd both always wonder, and honestly, I was hoping daylight would reveal some natural explanation, maybe a weirdly shaped tree or a hunter's blind that had played tricks on our tired eyes. After breakfast, we drove back to that stretch of road. It looked completely different in daylight, just a normal Forest Service road cutting through pine forest. We slowed down when we spotted the stand of trees I'd seen the orange light in. "This is it," I said, pulling over. We got out cautiously, looking around. The morning was quiet except for birds and the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. We walked over to the large rock first, the one the figure had been standing behind. That's when the reality of what we'd seen hit me even harder. Both Jake and I are about 5'10". Standing next to that rock, the top of it came up to our chests, which meant that whatever we'd seen, visible from the navel upward above this rock, had to be well over 7 feet tall, probably closer to 8. "Jesus," Jake muttered, clearly making the same calculation. We looked around the area, not sure what we were hoping to find. There were no footprints that we could see. The ground was too rocky and covered with pine needles, but when we walked to the opposite side of the road, something caught my eye. The gravel shoulder showed signs of disturbance, like something heavy had stepped down from the hillside, crossed the road, and headed toward that stand of trees. The indentations were larger than my boot prints and spaced further apart. Jake took some photos with his phone, though I knew they wouldn't really show anything conclusive. We spent about 20 minutes looking around, but there was nothing else to find. No hair, no other tracks, nothing that would prove to anyone else what we'd seen. As we stood there in the morning light, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a person on stilts playing a prank. But out here, miles from anywhere, at 4 in the morning, or some kind of elaborate hunter's blind. But why would it move to watch us? We eventually gave up our search and went back to our campsite. We stayed for the full 3 days we'd planned, fishing and hiking during daylight. But neither of us wanted to wander far from camp, and we were both back in the tent well before dark each night. We never saw the figure again, though on the second night I thought I heard heavy footsteps circling our camp around 3 a.m. Jake was asleep, and I lay frozen in my sleeping bag, hardly daring to breathe until the sounds faded away. I've spent hours researching since we got back, looking into reports of unusual sightings in Colorado's mountains. There are stories of something called the Colorado Bigfoot or the San Isabel Forest Giant, but most of them describe a hair-covered creature. What we saw didn't look hairy. Its silhouette was smooth, more like it was wearing clothing or some kind of covering. The orange light remains the most inexplicable part. I've wondered if it could have been some kind of lure or signal. Was it trying to attract our attention? Or communicating with something else in those woods? Jake and I have only talked about it a few times since returning home. He's heading to college next month, and I can tell he's trying to put it behind him. He suggested maybe we were both hallucinating from exhaustion after driving all night. I almost wish I could believe that, but I know what I saw watching us from behind that rock. Something intelligent, something that didn't want to be fully seen but made sure we knew it was there. Something that shouldn't exist in those mountains. I keep thinking about that urge I felt not to stop the truck. Was that just self-preservation kicking in? Or was it something else? Like it was somehow projecting that thought into my mind. I don't have answers. All I know is I won't be camping in those mountains again, especially not at night. And whenever I see an orange light in the darkness now, even just a cigarette or distant campfire, I feel that same cold dread wash over me, because whatever was watching us that night, I'm certain it's still out there, waiting, observing. and I can't shake the feeling that we were lucky to just be passing through its territory instead of staying. Story 13. I still can't believe what happened to me back in November of 2006. It's been years, but I swear I can still hear that scream in my nightmares. I've been hunting most of my life in Lewis County, Washington, but nothing could have prepared me for what I saw that day. I was road hunting near Doty that afternoon. My son and his girlfriend had come along for the trip, but they wanted to stay back at this nice spot we'd found earlier. I told them I was going to check out this old logging road I remembered. It led to a small clear-cut area that had been closed off to most vehicles for about 3 years. The Forest Service had put up some barriers, but my truck could still make it through if I was careful. It was getting late in the day, maybe around 4 in the afternoon. November days get dark early up here. The sky was overcast, typical Washington weather, and there was this eerie stillness in the air. I remember thinking it was strange how quiet it was as I drove up that old road. Usually, you'd see some deer tracks crossing the mud, maybe spot a grouse or two along the edges. But there was nothing. No tracks, no animals, nothing. It was like everything had cleared out of the area. I made it to the end of the road where it opened up into that small, clear cut. I was just sitting there in my truck, scanning the area with my binoculars, when something caught my eye. Something big and black moving near the tree line about 40 yards away. At first, I thought maybe it was a bear. We get black bears in these parts, and I figured that might explain the lack of other wildlife. But then it stood up. I'm not talking about a bear standing on its hind legs for a moment. This thing stood up fully, turned, and looked right at me. I froze. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. What I was looking at was no bear. This thing, this creature, was only about 15 feet away from me now, standing on a slight downhill slope. Even with the elevation difference, it was almost at eye level with my truck. I'm in a Chevy Silverado, so that puts the window at about 6 feet high. This thing was massive, easily over 8 feet tall, with shoulders that must have been 4 feet across. It was covered in thick black hair that looked matted in some places. Its face was dark, with deep-set eyes that just stared at me. I couldn't move. I couldn't even think. I just sat there, my body frozen but my mind racing. The creature seemed just as nervous as I was. It started shifting its weight from one foot to the other, swaying a bit, and making these strange movements with its arms. Not exactly waving, but like it was trying to figure out what to do with them. Without thinking, I blurted out, "Holy shit!" My voice sounded strange even to me, all high-pitched and shaky. When I spoke, the thing's reaction was immediate. Its cheeks puffed out, inflating like it was holding its breath, and it started making these weird muttering sounds, not words exactly, more like grunts and mumbles strung together. It was communicating something, I swear it was. I don't know what possessed me, but I made a noise back at it, just a whoa, whoa kind of sound, I don't know what I was trying to do. Maybe calm it down, maybe calm myself down. That's when everything went to hell. This thing threw its head back and let out a scream that I still can't describe properly. It wasn't like any animal I've ever heard. Not a bear, not a cougar, nothing natural. It was loud enough that my ears hurt, and it had this quality to it, like it contained rage and fear all mixed together. I screamed too. I couldn't help it. Pure instinct took over, and I just yelled back at it, a sound I didn't even recognize as coming from me. For a second, we just stared at each other after that exchange of screams. Then, in one fluid motion, this creature turned around, stepped onto a big stump near the edge of the clear-cut, and jumped. I'm not talking about a little hop. It fucking launched itself downhill into the forest. Something that big shouldn't have been able to move that fast, or that gracefully, but it did. The second it disappeared, I threw my truck into reverse and got the hell out of there. I was shaking so bad I could barely steer. My heart was pounding like it was going to burst out of my chest. I kept checking my mirrors, convinced that thing was going to come charging after me. I made it back to where I'd left my son and his girlfriend, about 3/4 of a mile away. in record time. When I pulled up, they took one look at my face and knew something was wrong. My son jumped up and came over to the truck. "Dad, what happened? You look like you've seen a ghost." I couldn't even speak. I just shook my head and tried to catch my breath. I felt sick to my stomach, like I might throw up. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, and I was sweating despite the cold. It took me about an hour to calm down enough to tell them what I'd seen. I kept stopping, trying to find the right words, but how do you explain something like that? Finally, I just laid it out. I told them I'd seen a Bigfoot, plain and simple, 8 feet tall, massive, covered in black hair, the whole deal. I expected them to laugh or at least look skeptical. Instead, my son's girlfriend got this weird look on her face. "We heard something," she said quietly, "about 20 minutes ago. A scream from the direction you were in. We thought it might have been an animal, but it didn't sound like any animal we've ever heard," my son finished for her. "It was different." That's when I got chills all over again. They'd heard it. They'd actually heard that thing scream from 3/4 of a mile away. My son, always the curious one, started pestering me to take them back there. "No way," I told him. No fucking way was I going back to that spot, especially with darkness falling, but he kept at it. He'd grown up hearing Bigfoot stories, watching those TV shows, and now his dad had actually seen one. He wasn't going to let this go. "Just drive us up there," he kept saying. "We'll stay in the truck, engine running, ready to bolt if we need to." I don't know why I gave in. Maybe I needed to prove to myself that I hadn't imagined the whole thing. Maybe I needed witnesses. Either way, it was stupid, and I regret it to this day. We waited until it was fully dark, around 6:30 or 7. Then, against my better judgment, I drove us back up that logging road. My hands were sweating on the steering wheel the whole time. When we got to the clear cut, I stopped the truck but left the headlights on, pointing into the darkness where I'd seen the creature disappear. I shut off the engine so we could listen. For a few minutes there was nothing, just the sound of our breathing and the occasional tick of the cooling engine. Then we heard it, cracking sounds like branches breaking, something moving in the dark forest beyond the reach of our headlights. "Dad," my son whispered, "what's that?" Before I could answer, we heard the muttering again. That same strange jumble of sounds, like mumbled bad Japanese, is the only way I can describe it. It was coming from the darkness just beyond where our lights reached. Then things got weird. We could hear what sounded like something hitting trees, not just brushing past them, but deliberately striking them. It was like the thing was having a tantrum out there in the dark, throwing things and hitting things. We sat there, frozen in our seats, listening to this bizarre display. I couldn't see anything beyond the edge of the headlight beams, but I could feel it out there, watching us, angry that we'd come back. After about 5 minutes of this, my son's girlfriend started to lose it. She was breathing fast, on the verge of hyperventilating. "I want to go," she said, her voice shaking. "Please, can we go now?" That snapped me out of it. I started the engine, threw the truck into reverse, and got us the hell out of there for the second time that day. None of us spoke on the drive back to the main road. What was there to say? I reported what happened to a local Bigfoot researcher a few weeks later. A woman named Sabella Irwin interviewed me, had me describe what I'd seen in detail. She even worked with me to create a drawing of the creature. Looking at that finished drawing brought it all back. The size of it, the way it moved, that terrible scream. I haven't been back to that area since. I still hunt, but never alone, and never near Doty. Some people don't believe me when I tell this story. That's fine. I wouldn't believe it either if I hadn't lived it. But my son and his girlfriend were there for part of it. They heard what I heard. I don't know what that thing was doing in that clear cut that day. I don't know why there were no other animals around. And I sure as hell don't know what it was trying to communicate to me with those strange sounds. All I know is that something unnatural was out there in those woods, something that shouldn't exist according to science, but does. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, hearing that scream echo in my head. 8 feet tall at least. Shoulders broader than any human I've ever seen, moving like nothing that size should be able to move. I know what I saw, and I know that I'm never going to forget it no matter how many years pass. Story 14. I've never told this to anyone outside my immediate family. For the longest time, I couldn't bring myself to talk about it at all. I was just a kid when it happened, 8 years old, and I figured nobody would believe me anyway. But after reading so many similar accounts from the Okanagan Valley area, I feel like maybe I'm not crazy after all. Maybe what I saw was real. We lived in a single-level ranch house on a ridge overlooking Lake Okanagan. It was a beautiful spot, surrounded by nature. My dad had moved us there the previous year for his new forestry job. Our backyard basically sloped down toward the lake, with a small concrete patio just outside the sliding glass door on the west side of the house. Beyond that was our lawn, then an old apple orchard, and finally the path down to the lake. I used to love that house. After what happened, though, I never felt the same about it. It was early summer, sometime in June of 1974. School had just let out for the year, and I was excited about spending my days swimming in the lake and exploring the woods with my friends. That morning, I'll never forget it, I woke up super early. The sky was just starting to lighten, probably around 5 in the morning. Everyone else was still asleep, even my mom, who was usually the first one up. I remember feeling weirdly alert, like something had deliberately woken me. Not a noise exactly, just something. My bedroom was at the east end of the house, away from the lake, but I got out of bed and wandered down the hallway toward the kitchen. The house was so quiet, just the tick of the clock on the wall and the hum of the refrigerator. I wasn't scared or anything, just curious about why I was up so early. The morning light was filling the house with this soft blue glow. I remember thinking how peaceful everything seemed. I was heading to the kitchen to maybe get some cereal when I glanced out the side window that faced our backyard and the lake beyond. That's when I saw it. At first, my brain couldn't make sense of what I was looking at. About 20 meters from the house, right on our lawn in front of the sliding glass door, was this figure. It was crouched down, completely still. From where I stood, I could see it in profile, and even hunched over like that. It was massive, so tall that its head was nearly touching the eaves of our roof overhang. I froze, completely froze. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, couldn't do anything but stare. The thing was dark, not just dark-colored, but almost like it was absorbing the light around it. It wasn't a shadow, though. It was solid, real. Its shoulders were impossibly broad, like twice the width of my dad's, and he was a big guy. Its arms hung down at its sides, and they seemed too long for its body, even though the proportions were generally human-like. I couldn't make out facial features from that angle, just the silhouette of what looked like a head sitting directly on those massive shoulders. No neck that I could see, no clothes either, just this dark, solid form. For what felt like forever, but was probably only 5 or 6 seconds, it just stayed there, perfectly still. It seemed to be looking at our sliding glass door like it was, I don't know, studying the house, listening, waiting for something. I had the overwhelming feeling it was aware of everything around it, even though it wasn't moving. Then, without any warning, it turned. The movement was fluid, almost graceful despite its size. It rotated a full 180 degrees, and for a split second, I thought it might have seen me through the window. But it didn't look toward the house. Instead, it just started walking away, across our lawn toward the orchard. It walked upright on 2 legs, but something about its gait was off. Not limping exactly, but not moving like a normal person. Either, more fluid somehow. Each stride covered more ground than should have been possible. Within seconds, it had crossed our entire yard and disappeared into the apple trees. The whole thing happened in complete silence. No footsteps, no breathing, No rustling of grass. Nothing. Just this enormous dark figure appearing and then leaving. When it was gone, I suddenly felt like I could move again. My first instinct wasn't to yell or to wake up my parents. Instead, I tiptoed back to my bedroom, crawled under my covers, and pulled them over my head. I was shaking so hard my teeth were chattering, but I was terrified of making noise. Somehow, I knew making noise was the worst thing I could do. I must have eventually fallen back asleep because the next thing I remember is my mum waking me up for breakfast. Everything seemed normal. Sunlight streaming through the windows, the smell of pancakes from the kitchen, my little brother already fighting with my dad about something. For a moment, I wondered if I'd dreamed the whole thing. But I knew I hadn't. It had been too real, too vivid. The way the thing moved, the impossible dimensions of its body, the absolute stillness of it before it turned. These weren't things my 8-year-old imagination could have made up. I didn't tell anyone that day, or the next, or the day after that. I didn't know how to explain what I'd seen, and I was afraid they'd think I was making it up or had a nightmare. But things changed for me after that morning. I started having trouble sleeping. I'd lie awake at night, staring at my window, terrified I'd see that figure silhouetted against the glass. I refused to look out any windows after dark. I made excuses not to play outside when the sun started to set. The backyard, which had been my favorite place to play, became somewhere I only went when other people were around. My mom noticed the change in me. She asked if something was wrong, if someone at school had been mean to me. I just shook my head and said I was fine. How could I explain what I'd seen when I didn't understand it myself? That fall, when my dad suggested we go camping up in the mountains, I had a complete meltdown, full-on hysterics. I couldn't explain why. I just knew I couldn't bear the thought of being out in the woods, especially at night. My parents were baffled. I'd always loved camping before. As I got older, I tried to rationalize what I'd seen. Maybe it was a bear standing on its hind legs. But bears don't walk like that, and they certainly don't stand perfectly still like they're thinking. A person in a costume? At 5 in the morning, in our remote yard, with no car or any way to get there? It made no sense. The years went by and I got better at hiding my fear, but it never really went away. I refused to drive certain back roads at night. I chose a college in the city, far from forests and lakes. When friends suggested hiking trips or overnight camping, I always had an excuse ready. My family knew something had changed in me that summer, but they never knew why. It wasn't until I was in my 30s that I came across an article about Sasquatch sightings in British Columbia. I'd heard of Bigfoot, of course, who hasn't, but I'd always dismissed it as folklore, campfire stories. But this article was different. It collected accounts from people in the Okanagan Valley, many dating back decades, some from the exact area where we'd lived. As I read through their stories, chills ran down my spine. The descriptions, the height, the silence, the fluid movement, the dark appearance, the way it seemed to just appear and disappear, they matched what I'd seen. These weren't just vague claims about something in the woods. These were detailed accounts from people who had seen something they couldn't explain, just like me. One account in particular stood out. A forest ranger described seeing a huge, dark figure standing at the edge of a clearing around 4 in the morning. He said it was so still he initially thought it was a tree stump he hadn't noticed before. Then it turned and walked into the forest, covering ground with impossible speed despite never seeming to hurry. The ranger said he didn't report it officially because he knew no one would believe him. I understood that feeling all too well. After reading those accounts, I finally told my husband what I'd seen. He listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he didn't laugh or dismiss me. He just asked questions. What exactly did it look like? How did it move? How did it make me feel? I realized then that I'd been carrying this secret for so long, afraid of being ridiculed, when maybe I should have been talking about it all along. I'm 48 now, and I still don't know what I saw that summer morning. I've read about the Sasquatch legends of the First Nations people in British Columbia, about the centuries of sightings in those mountains and forests. Some say it's just a myth, a story that got out of hand. Others insist these creatures are real, just incredibly elusive. All I know is what I saw. Something huge and dark and silent, something that moved with purpose and intelligence, something that didn't belong in the world as I understood it. For just a few moments, I glimpsed something impossible, and it changed me forever. I still won't camp in the woods. I still get uneasy when I visit my parents at their house on the lake. And I still wonder, every time I look out at those apple trees, if it's out there somewhere, watching and waiting in perfect stillness. Sometimes I wish I could go back and tell my 8-year-old self that it's okay to talk about what she saw, that she's not crazy. Other times, I think maybe it was better not knowing that there are things in this world that defy explanation, things that exist in the spaces between what we know and what we fear. Whatever it was I saw that morning, I know it was real. As real as the house I lived in, as real as the lake beyond our yard. And after all these years, I still can't explain it. Story 15. I've been hunting all my life. Started going out with my dad when I was just a kid, probably around 8 or 9 years old. Been hunting on our family land in northern Michigan for almost 20 years now. I know these woods like the back of my hand. Every trail, every ridge, every good spot to set up. Never been afraid out there. Not once, until last week. It was the 3rd day of buck season. I'd been out twice already with no luck. Just a couple of small does that weren't worth taking. That morning, I got to my stand early, around 5:30. It's a good spot I built myself about 3 years back, wrapped around 2 massive oak trees about 15 feet up, giving me a clear view of a deer trail that cuts through this thick patch of scrub. Perfect location, about 25 yards from where they usually pass. The sun hadn't quite come up yet, just that grey early morning light starting to filter through the trees. I was settled in with my thermos of coffee, rifle ready, just waiting. This stand is about half a mile from where my dad usually sets up, so we're close enough to meet up afterward, but far enough apart that we don't spook each other's game. Around 7, I heard something crashing through the brush. Not the careful steps of a deer. This was loud, like something big moving without caring who heard it. I remember thinking, great, some idiot hiker just ruined my morning. When you hunt, you know that kind of disturbance can mean no deer will come through for hours. But then something happened that I've never experienced before. Everything went completely silent, and I mean silent. No birds chirping, no squirrels rustling in the leaves, no wind in the trees, nothing. It was like someone had hit a mute button on the entire forest. That's when I saw them. A small group of does, 6 of them, moving real cautious-like along the trail. They were acting strange, picking their way forward like they were walking on glass. No sniffing around for acorns, no casual browsing, just moving, eyes wide, ears twitching constantly. When they got to the edge of that thick scrub patch, something happened that I still can't explain. All 6 deer suddenly jumped straight up into the air. Not like they were spooked and running. They literally leapt straight up, legs scrambling in the air before they came back down. The second their hooves hit the ground, 4 of them bolted in absolute panic, moving faster than I've ever seen deer run. Before I could even process what I was seeing, the thicket exploded. I don't mean rustled or moved, I mean exploded. Branches and leaves flying everywhere as 2 things burst out of it. These weren't bears. They weren't wolves or coyotes or anything I've ever seen before. They were massive, easily 7 feet tall, covered in reddish-brown hair or fur. And they moved so goddamn fast. 1 second they were in the thicket, the next they had each grabbed one of the remaining does, grabbed them mid-sprint like it was nothing. I watched in absolute shock as they effortlessly snapped the necks of these full-grown deer, just twisted them like you'd twist the cap off a soda bottle. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't even think about raising my rifle. I just sat there, frozen, as these monsters slung the dead deer over their shoulders like they weighed nothing, like backpacks. And their faces, Jesus Christ, their faces. They weren't animal faces. They were twisted, nightmarish versions of, I don't even know what. Not quite human, not quite animal, all wrong proportions. Eyes too far apart, mouths too wide with teeth that didn't fit. It was like someone had tried to make a human face without ever actually seeing one. Then they started walking right toward my stand, right under my tree. I was trying not to breathe, not to make a sound. 15 feet up, suddenly felt like inches. One of them stopped directly beneath me. I could smell it, like wet fur and something rotting. And then it let out a sound that I will never, ever forget. It wasn't a growl or a roar like any animal I know. It started low, almost like a hum, then built into this deep vibrating sound that went through my entire body. I could feel it in my chest, in my bones, in my teeth. The whole stand was vibrating. It felt like my insides were being shaken apart. The sound kept going and going, getting louder until I thought my eardrums would burst. It was primal and ancient and wrong. When it finally stopped, the second creature made this sharp grunting noise, almost like a response. Then they just walked away, casual as can be, carrying those dead deer, moving deeper into the forest until the trees seemed to swallow them up. I don't know how long I sat there afterward. Could have been minutes, could have been an hour. I couldn't move. My hands were locked around the rail of my stand so tight my knuckles were white. I couldn't feel my legs. The next thing I remember clearly is my dad showing up, running with his rifle ready. He'd heard that roar, or whatever it was, from his stand half a mile away and came running, thinking I was in trouble. He found me still sitting there, unable to move or speak. He had to help me down from the tree. My legs just wouldn't work right. When I finally could talk, I tried to tell him what I'd seen. He didn't say much, just listened with this look on his face I'd never seen before. Not disbelief, something else. Something that scared me almost as much as what I'd seen. That night, after we got back to the cabin, I had this flash of memory hit me so hard it almost knocked me over. Something I'd completely forgotten about from when I was little, maybe 5 or 6 years old. Our family has owned this land for generations. We used to spend whole summers up at the cabin when I was a kid. I remembered waking up one night in my bedroom, the one with the window that faced the edge of the woods, and there was a face pressed against the glass, a face just like the ones I'd seen that morning, all wrong proportions, too wide, eyes too far apart. It was looking right at me. I remember being too terrified to move, to call out, to do anything but lie there and stare back until it finally moved away. I must have buried that memory deep, because I swear I haven't thought about it once in all these years. Until now. I haven't been back to the woods since last week. Dad went out the next day to where I said I'd seen those things. He didn't find anything. No blood, no deer carcasses, no tracks, nothing. He didn't say I was making it up, but I could tell he was relieved there was no evidence. But I know what I saw, and the worst part is, I think my dad might know too. There was something in the way he reacted, not surprise, but resignation, like he'd been waiting for this day to come. I've been doing research online, looking for anything similar, found a few stories from people in the area over the years, hikers going missing, hunters describing weird experiences, locals talking about areas of the forest they avoid. Nothing exactly like what I saw, but enough to make me wonder how long these things have been out there, and how many people have seen them and either didn't live to tell about it, or were too afraid people would think they were crazy. I can't sleep right anymore. Every time I close my eyes, I see those faces. I hear that sound. I feel it vibrating through my body. Something about that encounter changed me. Woke up something deep in my brain that was supposed to stay dormant, supposed to protect me from knowing there are things in this world that don't make sense. I don't know if I'll ever go back to those woods. Part of me says I'm being ridiculous, that I've hunted there my whole life without incident. But another part, a deeper, more primal part, knows that the forest isn't ours. It never was. We're just visitors who've been tolerated. And I can't shake the feeling that whatever those things were, they wanted me to see them. They knew I was there. They could have taken me as easily as they took those deer. But instead they looked up. I'm sure of it. They looked right at me and then they walked away, like they were sending a message. I still have the rifle I was holding that day, never fired a shot, never even raised it. What good would it have done anyway? Those things moved faster than anything I've ever seen, broke a deer's neck like it was a twig. Dad called yesterday, asked if I was coming up this weekend, said the hunting's been good. I told him I wasn't feeling well. He didn't push it. I don't know if I'll ever tell anyone else about this. Who would believe me? But I know what I saw. And I know that sound will stay with me forever. That roar that seemed to come from somewhere ancient and dark. Something that's been in those woods long before we ever were, and I can't help wondering how many other people have seen them. How many others are out there right now, like me, too afraid to say anything, too afraid people will think they're crazy. All I know is that I'm not going back to those woods, not for a long time, maybe never. Because sometimes I swear I can hear that sound again, carried on the wind. And sometimes late at night when I can't sleep, I find myself checking the windows, making sure there's nothing looking in. Story 16. I've never really told this story online before, but it's been over 20 years, and I still can't explain what happened that day. I was 11 years old in 2000, living in Columbia, Missouri. It was late October, I think, one of those fall days where the sky is completely gray, but it's still weirdly bright out. My best friend Katie and I were hanging out with her older brother Josh that afternoon. Josh was 13 or 14 then, and he usually didn't want anything to do with us little kids, but their mom had made him take us along when he went biking. We didn't mind. We were just happy to be included for once. We were on this bike trail that ran between two patches of dense forest. I remember the leaves had started falling, and they made this crunching sound under our tires. The whole place had that damp, earthy smell that comes after it rains. It wasn't cold enough for jackets yet, but I had on this purple hoodie my grandma had gotten me for my birthday. Josh was riding ahead of us, probably trying to pretend he was alone. Katie and I were side by side, talking about some TV show we were both obsessed with. I can't even remember what show now, which is weird because I remember almost everything else about that day with perfect clarity. We'd been riding for maybe 20 minutes when I first heard it, this weird shuffling noise coming from the trees to our left. At first, I thought it was just the wind moving through the leaves, but then it got louder, more deliberate, like something big was moving through the underbrush. "Did you hear that?" I asked Katie, slowing down a bit. She nodded, and we both looked over toward the sound. Josh had stopped up ahead and was looking back at us, annoyed that we were falling behind. "Come on, slowpokes," he called. That's when it happened. The rustling got really loud, and suddenly this thing just stepped out from between the trees. It crossed right in front of our bikes, not even 30 feet ahead of us. I slammed on my brakes so hard I nearly flew over the handlebars. Katie stopped too, and Josh was frozen in place further up the path. This wasn't like seeing a deer or even a bear. Those are startling, sure, but you know what you're looking at. This was something else entirely. It was tall, taller than any man I'd ever seen, probably around 6.5 feet, but impossibly skinny, like someone had stretched a normal person out. Its arms were the worst. They hung down almost to its knees, swinging in this weird egg-shaped motion as it walked. Not swinging forward and back like a person's arms, but in these wide, circular arcs. The thing was covered in this matted, reddish hair. Not brown like you'd expect from a bear, or even the black or brown you hear about with Bigfoot stories. This was a rusty, dirty red color, like old blood mixed with dirt. The hair was long and tangled, especially around what I guess was its head. though I never saw its face clearly. It moved wrong. I don't know how else to describe it. There was something about the way it walked that just wasn't right. It was smooth, almost graceful in a disturbing way, like its joints didn't work like ours do. It reminded me of those sped-up nature videos where you see a plant growing, that fluid but jerky motion. The whole thing only lasted maybe 5 or 6 seconds. It crossed the path and disappeared into the trees on the other side without ever acknowledging us. It didn't look our way, didn't react to our presence at all. It was like we weren't even there. The weirdest part was how deliberate it all seemed. This wasn't an animal startled into running across our path. It just decided to cross right then, right in front of us, like it was on some predetermined route. None of us said anything at first. We just sat there on our bikes, staring at the spot where it had vanished into the trees. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. My hands were shaking on the handlebars, and I realized I'd been holding my breath. Josh was the first to move. Without saying a word, he turned his bike around and started pedaling back the way we'd come. Katie and I followed immediately. No one had to suggest it. We all just knew we needed to get out of there. We rode faster than I'd ever biked before. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see that thing loping after us with those 2 long arms swinging at its sides. But the path behind us stayed empty. It wasn't until we were nearly back to Katie's house that Josh finally spoke. "Did you guys see that?" His voice was higher than usual. "Yeah," Katie whispered. "What was it?" I remember shaking my head. "I don't know." And that was pretty much all we said about it then. When we got back to their house, none of us mentioned what had happened. It was like we had this unspoken agreement not to talk about it. I think we were afraid that saying it out loud would make it more real somehow. I had nightmares for weeks afterward, always the same. I'd be alone on that bike path, and I'd hear the rustling in the trees. But in my dreams, the thing would turn and look at me with a face I could never quite see, and those long arms would reach for me. About a month later, I finally worked up the courage to ask Katie about it. We were having a sleepover, and after her mom had gone to bed, I whispered, "Do you ever think about what we saw that day?" She knew exactly what I meant. "Josh says it was just some weirdo in the woods," she said, "like some homeless guy or something." But I could tell from her voice that she didn't believe that any more than I did. "It wasn't a person," I said. "I know." "So what was it?" She didn't have an answer. A couple years later, when I was in middle school, I tried researching it. This was before smartphones and when the internet was still kind of new, so I spent hours in the library looking through books about local wildlife, cryptids, and folklore. Nothing matched what we'd seen. Bigfoot descriptions always mentioned black or brown hair, not that strange reddish color, and the proportions were all wrong. This thing was thin, almost emaciated looking, not the bulky creature from the Patterson-Gimlin film they always showed on those monster shows. I even tried to find reports of weird sightings around Colombia, thinking maybe someone else had seen it too. But if they had, they weren't talking about it publicly. As I got older, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just a very tall, thin person with long red hair. Maybe they were wearing some kind of costume. Maybe it was just a deer that my frightened 11-year-old mind had transformed into something more sinister. But none of those explanations ever felt right. They didn't account for those impossibly long arms, that unnatural gait, the way it moved through the underbrush without seeming to disturb it much. And they didn't explain why all 3 of us saw the same thing. I lost touch with Katie after high school when we went to different colleges. I heard Josh joined the military. Sometimes I wonder if they still think about what we saw, if it haunts them the way it does me. The thing is, I'm 29 now. I've been through college, held multiple jobs, been in relationships, all the normal adult stuff. I'm not an imaginative kid anymore. I understand how memory works, how it can be unreliable, how our minds can play tricks on us. But this memory hasn't faded or changed. It's still right there, crystal clear, exactly as it happened. I can still see that thing stepping out from between the trees, still feel the rush of cold fear that washed over me, still remember the absolute certainty I felt that whatever we were looking at wasn't supposed to exist. Last year, I was back in Colombia visiting my parents. On an impulse, I drove out to the bike trail. It's more developed now, wider, better maintained, with little signs identifying local plants and wildlife. There were families with kids, joggers with dogs, couples holding hands. It all seemed so normal, so safe. I walked about a mile down the path, trying to figure out exactly where we'd been that day. The trees seemed smaller somehow, the forest less dense. Everything looked different through adult eyes. I stopped at a spot that felt familiar and just stood there staring into the trees. Was this where it happened? Had that thing crossed the path right here 20 years ago, or had I somehow invented the whole experience? A jogger passed by, giving me a curious look as I stood there staring into the woods. I must have seemed strange to her, just standing motionless on the side of the path. I smiled awkwardly and moved on. As I walked back to my car, I found myself glancing over my shoulder, watching the spaces between the trees. I realized I was listening for that rustling sound, half expecting to see that tall, red-haired figure step out onto the path again. It never did, of course, but sometimes I dream about it still. And sometimes when I'm alone in wooded areas, I get this feeling, this absolute certainty that I'm being watched by something that moves with that same fluid, unnatural grace. Something with long, matted red hair and arms that swing in egg-like arcs at its sides. I don't know what we saw that day in the woods outside Colombia. I probably never will. But I know we saw something. All three of us. Something that wasn't human, that wasn't any animal I've ever heard of. Something that, for just a few seconds, let itself be seen before melting back into the trees and disappearing as suddenly as it had appeared. And sometimes I can't help but wonder, did it show itself to us on purpose? And if it did, why?